Was I expelled from Hogwarts? Greetings, fellow multiversal adventurers. It's an honor to have you back in this saga that has us all hooked. Official channel statement: this story is 100% epic fiction. So please don't attempt real magic, the results aren't guaranteed and insurance won't cover it. The rights to this masterpiece belong entirely to its brilliant original author. We are just a barge sharing it with you. Do you want to keep being part of this amazing community? Join our ninja army of subscribers on YouTube and give this content a like. And for true fans, our Patreon has exclusive ninjutsu waiting for you. Chapter 126: Sherry's Escape. When Ralph entered the room, Nit had already relayed Dumbledore's opinion, and Lockhart also indicated that he would accept the position. Mr. Scamander, thank you for the news, Lockhart said with a smile upon seeing Ralph. By the way, I heard Ralph is going to take the Dragon Tamer exam. Yes, that's wonderful. I'm also preparing to take the exam and become a Dragon Tamer, Lockhart assured him. I'm sure I can easily become a Dragon Tamer. During the exam, I'll help take care of him and make sure his life isn't in danger. Ralph looked at him strangely, but smiled kindly and said, Then thank you, Mr. Lockhart. You're welcome, Ralph. I have high hopes for you. By the way, shall we have dinner together tonight? Mr. Scamander, I've prepared a bottle of good wine, Lockhart invited. It'll definitely be on the front page of the Daily Prophet tomorrow, the first meeting of two great magizoologists. Those reporters will definitely pay 1,000 galleons for our conversation. Lockhart had already planned the direction of the publicity. I'm sorry, Mr. Lockhart, we have other things to do tonight, Nit declined. We won't be able to have dinner with you, that's a pity. After being refused, Lockhart chatted for a while longer before tactfully leaving. Before leaving, he told Ralph that he could ask him for advice on defense against the dark magic if he had time. After Lockhart left, Newt and Ralph packed their bags and prepared to leave. Standing at the door, Ralph glanced back at the house, and Newt asked suspiciously, What's wrong? Nothing, just worried someone might come looking for me, Ralph said. It's all right, we'll be back soon, Newt reassured him. The boy nodded and followed the old man into the vast night. The night was deep. On the table, a porcelain oil lamp lit up the small room. A girl with a ponytail sat on an old chair, holding a slender needle, sewing clothes. The girl seemed distracted, her delicate eyebrows furrowing as she realized she'd pricked her finger with a needle, blood slowly trickling down. Shirley, this is the 6th time you've pricked your finger tonight, said the girl beside her, her needlework continuing, but her eyes glancing at Shirley with concern. If you keep getting distracted like this, you'll have a hard time finishing your work tonight. Be careful, or you'll get punished by the nuns. Shirley gently rubbed her cheek, trying to stay alert, and whispered, Teresia, I'll be careful. Teresia looked at the girl she'd grown up with a troubled expression. Was needlework in prayer really that difficult? Hadn't she endured it all these years? Shirley had only been gone a year, yet she already seemed so out of place in this convent. Don't you have to pray and sew there? Teresia asked curiously. Hogwarts, the girl with the ponytail was interrupted by Teresia before she could finish. She lowered her voice and said, Shirley, don't mention that name, the nuns forbid it. You forgot that night you were punished by having to fetch water alone. Teresa looked up and cautiously glanced at the nuns in the distance. Fortunately, Sister Talia wasn't paying attention to the two of them tonight, otherwise, she would definitely have been punished. Shirley, be careful lately, Teresa reminded her. I got up to use the toilet that night and overheard Delphine and the others discussing how to deal with you. Delphine was a bit older than them and belonged to another small group. Even in a monastery, violence exists and is unavoidable. It's all right, let them come. I'll teach them a lesson they'll never forget, Shirley said calmly. Don't be afraid of them either, Sai, I know you. You used to dare to fight them with sticks. By the way, what about the baseball bat you found? Why didn't you bring it back? I left it in a box. Shirley's lips curled slightly. She drifted off again and stabbed her finger for the 7th time. Shirley, your silly grin reminds me of Sister Talia, the things she said to those young nuns, Teresa suddenly said with a grin. What things? The girl asked curiously. Don't be angry when I tell you, Teresa said in a high-pitched, shrill voice. Look at you all, so wanton, always thinking about men. What nonsense are you talking about? Shirley blushed, somewhat annoyed. A year had passed, and Teresa had become quite outspoken. Don't be angry when I tell you, Teresa said, suppressing a laugh. Oh, this is the first time I've seen you blush. You've even learned to be shy after going out for a while. Were the boys outside handsome? Shirley hesitated for a moment, but didn't deny it. Instead, she nodded gently. Teresa looked surprised, then giggled. Shirley, you've really changed a lot. The girl with the ponytail rested her chin on her hands, gazing at Teresa's needlework. Suddenly, she said, I'm leaving here. Teresa was taken aback. She frowned at her best friend and but where are you going? Didn't you say your school is closed for summer vacation? You have no money, not even for a ticket, and the nuns have confiscated all your belongings. They didn't confiscate anything important, and I have the ticket money, Shirley said softly but firmly. I'm going to London, or, in short, I'm not staying here. Teresa looked at the girl with the ponytail, somewhat envious of her peer's boldness. She would never dare to do that. Sister Talia suddenly looked up. She had a thin face, sharp eyes, and lips so thin they were almost invisible. She frowned and looked at Shirley. Children, what are you talking about? Shirley and I were talking about who sews faster. Teresa smiled at Sister Talia. Shirley, you are indeed very slow. Hurry up, or we'll have to fetch an extra bucket of water tomorrow, Sister Talia said sternly. Shirley didn't speak, ignoring her. After finishing their last prayer of the day, everyone went to bed on time. The room wasn't big, but it felt like a large dormitory, with a row of girls sleeping there. Shirley didn't sleep, listening intently. After everyone was asleep, she touched her wallet hanging around her neck. It was a wallet made of the skin of a shape-shifting lizard. It would retract when a stranger approached, making it difficult to detect. Inside were Shirley's textbooks, wand, a few clothes, and money. There was also some luggage, locked in the headmistress's room, but she didn't plan to take it. She would leave it at the convent. The girl took out a bottle of polyjuice potion from her purse, containing a hair she had secretly plucked. After drinking it, her body began to grow rapidly. She then carefully took out a nun's habit, which she had secretly kept while doing laundry. Sherry changed her clothes, threw back the covers, and walked towards the door. Just as she turned the handle, Sister Talia, who was sleeping beside the door, suddenly opened her eyes. Mother Superior, what are you doing here? Talia asked in surprise. I just came in to take a look. Keep it down, don't wake them, Sherry whispered. You don't need to get up, I'm just looking around, okay? Although Talia felt strange, she didn't dare question the Mother Superior's words. Sherry opened the door and, alone, walked along the monastery's paths, easily making her way to a low wall. She encountered several patrolling nuns along the way, but none of them noticed anything amiss. Finally, the girl arrived at the wall, and after the effects of the polyjuice potion wore off, she changed back into her own clothes. The girl scrambled over the low wall, using both hands and feet. She sat on it, glancing back at the dark monastery, tears streaming down her face, each one shattering into a tiny fragment. Shirley jumped down, landing on a pile of withered grass. She pulled out a piece of parchment and, in the darkness, studied the address. Her mood suddenly brightened. She took out her wand and began to stumble along the path. The path was difficult, but the girl with the ponytail was happy. Chapter 127 The Door Key. A young witch with violet hair sat by a pool in front of a building, yawning listlessly. She wasn't leaving for England for a while, but as a lowly henchman, she'd arrived an hour early to prepare for any unforeseen circumstances. Aurors, though glamorous, had no holidays and no regular get-off-work hours. They were always on the move, rushing to wherever danger lurked. Tonks didn't regret choosing this profession, but she was incredibly bored. She just wanted anyone to keep her sister company. The witch picked up a handful of pebbles and started throwing them into the pool, listening to the sound. Suddenly, footsteps sounded in the distance. Tonks perked up and looked up, seeing two wizards approaching slowly. One was old, the other young, each carrying a leather suitcase. Although they looked unremarkable, those two suitcases alone were enough to make Twinks's eyelids twitch. She quickly jumped up and ran to meet them. Hello, Mr. Scamander. Mr. Scrimgeour is exchanging prisoners. You can rest in the lobby for a while. This way, please. Tonks, acting like a waiter, led the way towards the building. The group climbed the steps, and an Auror came out and respectfully ushered Newt inside. Ralph swaggered after Newt, about to enter the building to rest, when a delicate white hand grabbed his collar and dragged him backward. What are you doing? Ouch! Tonks! Let go. My clothes. No, the young witch looked quite thin, almost indistinguishable between her chest and back, but surprisingly strong. She dragged Ralph like a little chick towards the pool. Tonks loosened her collar, and Ralph rubbed his neck, saying, "Why did you drag me over here, just to keep me company?" Tonks sat down by the pool, tapping her chin on the steps. "Sit down, the air outside is fresher, and you can see the night view." "I'd rather sit on the sofa inside and eat pastries," Ralph said dismissively, but still sat down next to Tonks. "I have some snacks too." Tonks pulled a handful of sunflower seeds from her pocket and handed them over. Ralph grabbed the seeds from the witch's hand, laughing. "You're an Auror, and you carry this stuff in your pocket every day." "I'm a trainee Auror, is that a problem?" Tonks cracked open the seeds. "Another temporary worker now? You didn't say this when you tricked me on the train." Ralph clicked his tongue. "You really have a flexible professional aptitude." Tonks didn't respond, but just looked at him with admiration. "Your grandfather is so dignified." "That was my captain just now, and your grandfather just casually him," and the captain didn't dare to say anything. "Cold, so cool. No wonder he's a distinguished alumnus of Hufflepuff." "My grandfather is socially awkward." Ralph scratched his head. "It's not that he doesn't want to say more, he just can't say it." "What are you going back to England for?" Tonks asked curiously. "Isn't your summer vacation still going on?" "Attending a funeral," Ralph said succinctly. "Could it be?" Tonks lowered his voice, mysteriously saying, "Nico Flamel's funeral." "How did you know?" Ralph was genuinely surprised this time, not expecting Tonks to be so well informed. A group of wizards with an average age of over 100, and the most famous group of wizards in the world, suddenly appearing in England. Tonks rolled his eyes and said, "Even if the Auror office is slow-witted, they should have noticed something amiss by now. The average age is that high." Ralph asked in surprise, "Then am I seriously holding everyone back?" "Don't even mention you, even your grandfather is holding everyone back. He's one of the younger wizards there," Tonks said with a sigh. Alright, you can even attend a funeral of this caliber." Tonks nudged the boy with his elbow, eagerly asking, "Can you bring any relatives?" "Relatives? Who, me?" Tonks grinned. "I could be your long-lost half-sister, if you can bring me. Even your younger sister is fine." "Probably not." Ralph thought for a moment, then shook his head. "I have a proper invitation. I didn't sneak in with my grandfather, so the rumors are true." Tonks stroked his chin, scrutinizing the boy. "You really stopped Quirrell and saved the Philosopher's Stone, otherwise you wouldn't have received an invitation. Even if it were true, you wouldn't have given me the Order of Merlin." Ralph picked up a pebble and skipped it across the water. After creating 4 or 5 ripples, the pebble hit the inner wall of the tiled wall with a loud thud. "How old are you? Already thinking about the Order of Merlin?" Tonks continued cracking sunflower seeds, pouting. "By the time you get the medal, Scrimgeour will probably be dead. I'll definitely be the Auror Chief of Staff by then." Suddenly, Ralph turned and called out loudly, "Mr. Scrimgeour, long time no see." Tonks felt a chill run down her spine, her little hand trembling so much that she dropped the sunflower seeds. She turned to look, but there was no one there. Ralph burst into laughter. Embarrassed, Tonks forced a stern face, her purple hair turning a granny gray. Seeing Tonks's displeasure, Ralph forced back his laughter and changed the subject. "Why aren't we leaving yet? Chief Scrimgeour is still transferring prisoners," Tonks said, picking up the sunflower seeds again. "How are we getting back to England? We're not taking the Orient Express again, are we?" "No, for security reasons, we're using portkeys." Tonks placed the sunflower seeds she'd picked up into Ralph's hand, grinning mischievously. "Our target is Azkaban." "Huh, just kidding, don't be nervous." Tonks patted the boy's shoulder and laughed. "Ralph, you'll have plenty of opportunities to get in later. I'll personally escort you in." Ralph rolled his eyes. "Why didn't we use portkeys to get to Romania before? It almost caused a prisoner to escape." "Using portkeys across borders is a very troublesome matter. It requires prior communication with both ministries of magic," Tonks explained. "There are all sorts of procedures and approvals. It might take half a month to get them done." Just then, a group of wizards came out of the building, led by Director Scrimgeour. Tonks stood up, pulling Ralph along with her. She dusted herself off and said, "Let's go home." All the wizards walked towards Scrimgeour, before whom stood a statue of a Romanian fire-breathing dragon, its round, ruby eyes gleaming against its black marble face. They formed a tight circle around it, then placed their arms on the statue. Chapter 128 Nicholas Flamel. If apparition is like shoving you into a misfitting cage and then forcibly pulling you out, Then using a portkey is like the opposite poles of a magnet, first pulling you in, then violently blasting you away like a divine strike. Newbies using a portkey for the first time often feel a sense of utter disorientation, like my style is superior to yours, due to this sudden attraction and repulsion. But Ralph, having previously followed Newt across borders illegally using a portkey, was experienced enough to land safely on his feet. The boy looked up to see a magnificent, opulent hall. Under his feet were dark, glossy wooden floors, and above him was a peacock blue ceiling adorned with countless golden symbols, like golden koi fish. In the distance stood a magical fountain, its pool containing a group of pure gold statues, the tallest being a dashing wizard, one raised high, pointed to the sky. Surrounding him were a witch, a centaur, a goblin, and a house elf. Centaurs, goblins, and house elves all gazed up at the wizards and witches with boundless adoration. Ralph instantly pinpointed his location, the British Ministry of Magic. He observed the famous magical fountain with interest. Its history actually predates the Ministry of Magic itself. It was a magical statue looted during the expansion of the British Empire and eventually placed in the ministry's main hall. During the Goblin Rebellion in the 17th century, the goblin statue was damaged by wizards, but a new one was made after the rebellion ended. Now, the goblin statue's color clashes with the others. It was already night, and the Ministry of Magic had long since closed. Unlike the bustling daytime crowds, only a few wizards remained on duty. Mr. Scamander, shall I send an auror to escort you? Scrimgeour suggested. No need for that, Mr. Scrimgeour, Knit said hastily. Thank you so much for your help tonight, you're too kind, Mr. Scamander. Contact me again if you need anything. Scrimgeour wasn't one to dawdle. Since Newt refused, he left with a group of aurors and prisoners. Tonks waved goodbye to Ralph. Newt and Ralph walked towards the golden fireplace. After going inside, a woman's cold voice rang out. Location, Knit thought for a moment and said, Street. James's Park. Green flames flickered in the fireplace. Ralph felt dizzy, and when he opened his eyes again, he found himself in a blue police box. Ralph stepped out of the police box, and St. James's Park was not far away. St. James's Park is located in central London, adjacent to Westminster Abbey, Buckingham Palace, and St. James's Palace. It was originally King Henry VI's deer hunting ground, later becoming an execution ground during the Victorian era, and now it has become a park and sports field. Even at night, there are still many citizens and tourists. How do we get to Nicholas Flamel's estate? Ralph asked. Bring out the invitations, someone will come to pick us up. Newt and Rove pulled out the invitations and sat on a bench in the square, placing their 2 suitcases on the ground. While waiting, they fed the partridges that flew around. These partridges were ancestors given by the Russian ambassador to Charles II, the Happy King, and after centuries of breeding, they were now almost a plague, like the monkeys of Mount Emily. They would even attack tourists for food. After about 5 minutes, a black sedan sped up and stopped a short distance away. It was a beautifully designed classic car, flat and wide. With a classic beauty. Hello. Hello, came a French-accented English voice from inside the car. Are you Mr. Scamander? Rove looked up. The driver was an elderly man with white hair, a cigar in his mouth, and wearing black sunglasses. Nicole, why did you come in person? Knit walked over in surprise. An elderly man in a white robe stepped out of the car, extending his hand gracefully to Newt, and smiled. Of course I've come to welcome you. I'm sorry to have made you travel all the way from Romania because of my funeral. Newt, seemingly afraid of hurting Nico, carefully shook hands with the old man. This must be Ralph, Nico said, looking at the blond boy and extending his hand to him as well, smiling. Hello, I'm Nico Lemaitre, just call me Nico. Hello, Ralph mimicked Newt, lightly shaking the old man's hand, but Nico still gasped. Ralph quickly released his hand and apologized. The old man rubbed his palm and winked at the boy, saying, for an old man over 600 years old, his body is certainly not as robust as a young man's. Let's go, I'll take you to the manor. Nico Lemaitre sat in the driver's seat, and Newt and Ralph climbed into the comfortable and luxurious back seat of the car. Rove surveyed the car, expanded with a seamless stretch arm. It resembled a small house, complete with bookshelves, a variety of pastries, and a freestanding magical wine cabinet. Inside were several bottles of 1882 Lafite. Rove was somewhat taken aback. He'd said he came from an ordinary family. The car sped away from St. James's Park, racing down Thames Avenue. Through the window, Rove could vaguely see Big Ben and Tower Bridge in the distance. "Nicole, you still like racing so much?" Nick chuckled. "I haven't been racing as often these past few years," Nicole said, picking up a cigar and puffing away. Large plumes of smoke filled the air, but the cigar smoke and the back seat remained completely separate, as if an invisible barrier existed. "I haven't driven much these past few years since Brezhnev died." He was an interesting car enthusiast. Rove was also surprised. He knew Soren Kieran was a passionate car collector, but he hadn't expected him to be a fellow car enthusiast with Nicole Flamel. "What kind of car is that?" the boy asked curiously, having not recognized the logo at first glance. "My prized Studebaker, a custom-made model from back in the day." Though the company went bankrupt, Nico seemed to be a seasoned driver. He suddenly accelerated, heading towards Westminster Bridge. Ralph wanted to compliment Nico's driving skills, but the thought had barely formed when the car veered off the bridge and plunged into the Thames. The car landed on the water, and Ralph, sitting inside, felt no jolt. It was remarkably smooth. The car sped across the river, and Ralph could see the breathtaking scenery on both banks of the Thames, shrouded in mist. Muggles couldn't see the car, and the busy transport ships on the river jumped aside to avoid it, returning to their original positions once it had passed. The car sped up, and Ralph felt images flashing across his vision: rolling mountains, vast plains, low, undulating hills, cornfields steaming in the heat. Everything before him resembled a delicately painted impressionist painting, or a film presented to him in fast forward. After what seemed like an eternity, Ralph opened his eyes, leaning back in his comfortable leather seat. The car had stopped in front of a building. Nicholas Flamel smiled and said, "Welcome to my estate. Thanks to Just Love to Wonder and This Is Fantasy for their generous donations. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels." Chapter 129. How could there be a vice minister with only 38 years of age in this world? Early in the morning, Ralph awoke from his sleep. He lay on an antique-style large bed, beneath which sat a soft feather mattress, and behind his head a goose feather pillow. Although the bed curtains were drawn, the carved bedposts and the velvet canopy overhead were still visible. He threw back the covers, pulled back the curtains, got out of bed, and walked towards the window. The room was large and beautifully decorated, with a faint fragrance in the air, a pleasant, not cloying, scent that aided sleep. Ralph drew back the heavy brocade curtains and stood by the window, looking up. On the horizon, a sea of clouds formed from the brilliant sunrise, sunlight scattering across the distant river, shimmering like grains of gold sprinkled on the ground. From a slightly higher vantage point, the entire estate was also beautiful, with a magnificent building in the center, gleaming in the sunlight. A pyramid. Ralph admired it for a while, then began to wash up. Hot water and all the necessary toiletries were already prepared in the bathroom. Hidden in a cubicle within the room was a house elf, but it kept its distance, avoiding any appearance before Rove unless absolutely necessary. A good house elf is one whose existence you have no idea of. Rove changed his clothes and slowly walked out of the room. Before him lay a long, wide corridor with mahogany doors on both sides. These rooms were likely guest rooms. After arriving at the manor last night, they had toured the area with Nico's guidance and then eaten dinner. It was already late. Rove and Newt had then settled into separate rooms. The boy approached Newt's room and rang the doorbell, but there was no response after several attempts. It seemed Newt had already left. Just as Rove was about to leave, the door opposite suddenly opened, and an old man emerged. The man was thin, dressed in a gray robe, and had gray eyes with a sharp, piercing gaze. The old man greeted him. "Hey, Ralph." Ralph froze for a moment, somewhat taken aback, and said, "Headmaster Dippet." Armando Dippet was Dumbledore's predecessor. He was the headmaster of Hogwarts when Tom Riddle was still a student. After his retirement, he handed Hogwarts over to Dumbledore. It's been almost half a century, and he's still alive. The boy wanted to say, "You're still alive," but the words caught in his throat, and he thought of saying, "You're still alive," but it seemed to convey the same meaning. Ralph stood frozen, pondering a more appropriate response. Dippet extended his age-spotted hand, patted him on the shoulder, and smiled. "Don't be nervous, child. I've heard your portrait mention you many times. Although this is our first meeting, We're practically old acquaintances. Relax, you did a good job with the Chamber of Secrets. I didn't notice Tom Riddle's anomaly back then, which led to Myrtle Warren's death. I'm truly grateful you captured the basilisk. You're too kind. Ralph quickly waved his hand. He was indeed a little nervous. Someone you thought had died decades ago suddenly standing before you, anyone would panic. Let's go, let's have breakfast, Dippert said with a smile, walking down the corridor towards the dining room. Ralph followed behind, cautiously asking, Professor Dippert, if I may ask, how old are you this year? Over 300 years old, I suppose. Dippert thought for a moment, then shook his head. I can't remember exactly. But I do know that Ferdinand I was elected Holy Roman Emperor that year. In the corridor hung many portraits, one of which, a knight's portrait, suddenly proclaimed, Sir, Ferdinand I was elected Holy Roman Emperor in 1637, the year I died in battle. What a pity, Dippert said. Dippert led Ralph eastward through an arched corridor into a foyer adorned with Italian marble. Inside, a few scattered wizards sat, chatting and eating breakfast. These people were clearly there for the funeral. Armando, is this your great-grandson? First time seeing him, one wizard suddenly exclaimed. He was an old man, beardless, with deep-set eyes, sunken cheeks, and very little hair, only a few tufts above his ears. He's Newt's grandson, Depp explained with a smile. Newt? Even that kid has a grandson now? The last time I saw him, he was about the same age as this boy, the bald old man sighed, recalling, I remember, Newt violated my law on the reasonable restraint of underage wizards by using magic outside of school. Later, I heard he was expelled not long after. The old man chuckled, then glared at Ralph. Kid, you didn't use magic outside of school during the summer vacation, did you? Child, don't listen to his nonsense. A small, hunchbacked witch approached. The witch was quite old, her face covered in wrinkles like spider webs. She extended her hand and said, It's a pleasure to meet you. My name is Jersilda Marchban, and I'm the head of the Wizarding Examinations Authority. I'll be proctoring your Owl and Newt exams from now on, of course. Marchban blinked, provided you don't get expelled from Hogwarts like your grandfather, Rolf, of course, knew Jersilda Marchban. He extended his hand respectfully and said, My grandfather mentioned you. He said you gave him a lot of help in establishing the law against experimentation in animals. Young man, don't flatter me too much. I was even more helpful. The bald old man chuckled again. Guess who I am? If you guess right, there's a reward. As far as I know, the law on the reasonable restraint of underage wizards was passed by Minister Ferris Spavin in 1875. Ralph thought for a moment and said, Since you say you drafted it, and you're this age, you must be Minister Spavin, am I right? Haha, it's me. The greatest minister in the history of the British Ministry of Magic, the old man laughed. Great? I only know that if there were a vote for the most disliked minister, you'd definitely be chosen, Marchban sneered. If it weren't for the opposition from us Wizengamers back then, you old codger would still be holding onto your position. Ferris Spavin became minister in 1865, at the age of 109, and served for another 38 years, making him the longest-serving minister in history. The then deputy minister, seeing Spavin's advanced age, thought that the old man would die in a couple more years, and he could then succeed him as deputy minister. But Spavin's tenure was extraordinary, lasting until now. On his deathbed, the deputy minister left behind his famous last words, There is no such thing as a deputy minister for 38 years. Chapter 130 Where do we come from? In just the time it takes to eat breakfast, Ralph experienced a roller coaster of emotions. Wizards he had only ever seen in the history of magic or newspapers, and even those he thought were long dead, all appeared before him. Miranda Gossack, the witch who wrote the spellbook Standard Spells and Professor Flitwick's most admired witch, kept asking Ralph if there were any errors in the textbook. Yoselid Waldcock, the record holder for the most goals in the 20th century English Quidditch League, took the initiative to chat with Ralph about football techniques. Hearing that Ralph played for Hufflepuff Quidditch, he even invited him to trial at the club. A whole bunch of other wizards also chatted warmly with Ralph. The boy went from shock to excitement, and finally to numbness. In other places, the appearance of a famous wizard would be quite a rare sight, but in this small restaurant, you'd be embarrassed to greet someone if you hadn't received the Order of Merlin. This feeling was very similar to when Rove went to a conference with his mentor in his previous life. Everyone there was an academician, a Yangtze River scholar, or at the very least, a recipient of the Excellent Young Scientists Fund. Even the tea servers had youth grants. Rove, an academic slacker, was a rare find among them. After finishing his meal, Rove quickly made an excuse to leave the restaurant. He was too young and became the subject of everyone's teasing and discussion. An old witch even pinched his cheek, marveling at how youthful and radiant his body was. A wizard even offered to introduce his great-granddaughter to Rove. Just talk the talk, walk the walk. What? Already in his 20s? Forget it, Rove wasn't interested in old ladies. Tonks wasn't wrong, even nude among the wizards was a lower-than-average age figure, practically a young man. Rove left the house and strolled along the road. When he saw an unfamiliar elderly person, he stopped, smiled, and nodded. They were all elders, a smile was enough. Rove's main destination was the pyramid in the middle of the manor. It took him more than 10 minutes to get close. The pyramids were already awe-inspiring from afar, but standing at their base only amplified one's sense of insignificance. Standing by the wall, Ralph touched it. He had initially thought it was made of stone, but judging from the feel and luster, it seemed more like gold. Considering that philosophers' stones could create gold, these pyramids were probably not gilded. Gazing at the mountain of gold, over 30 meters high, Ralph was speechless. He couldn't help but wonder, how many nifflers would it take to move it all? The boy circled the pyramid, admiring the inscriptions and symbols on it. Each side had different symbols, which he couldn't recognize with his limited knowledge. Ralph circled the pyramid without finding an entrance. He assumed the pyramid was sealed and was about to leave when suddenly an entrance appeared in the wall. Ralph stood before the entrance, peering inside. He'd just look, not go in. Before this thought could even form, a tremendous suction force pulled Ralph inside, and he found himself in a large hall. In the center of the hall were more than a dozen deep wells. Rove stood beside a well, looking down. The well was deep, nearly 100 meters, and from the opening, it looked like a giant drain. He looked down and was suddenly startled. Lightning flashed and thunder roared at the bottom, as if a torrential rain was pouring down. Rove looked at the second well. This time, there was a spring at the bottom, but billowing black smoke rose from it. Just as he was about to look at the third well, he saw a thin, white-haired old man slowly approaching. "Nico. I didn't mean to come in," Rove explained. "Don't be nervous, Rove, I let you in," Nico said, standing beside Rove, looking at the wells, lightly stamping his foot, and smiling. "Do you know what you were looking at?" Rove shook his head. "No, the stuff in the first well is called primal soup," the old man chuckled. "Have you heard of it, a hypothesis about the origin of life?" Rove asked in surprise. "Yes," Nico's eyes gleamed. He exclaimed, "You really are, as Albus said, very knowledgeable about all things Muggle. I remember this was proposed by Darwin, wasn't it?" Ralph asked uncertainly. "That's right. A century ago, a botanist using the alias Joseph Hooker, a Muggle, corresponded with Darwin, and he proposed a hypothesis in his letters," Nico said softly. "If there were a gentle pond with ammonia, phosphate, light, heat, and electricity, everything, some kind of protein-like organic matter would form. After undergoing more complex changes, life might have arisen, like this." Nico pulled out a pipe from somewhere and suddenly began puffing out smoke. Within that smoke, like a screen, strange magical images appeared. A volcano suddenly erupted, lava fell into the sea, and lightning flashed across the sky, as if it were a scene from early Earth. Based on Darwin's ideas, I used alchemy to seal water, methane, ammonia, hydrogen, and carbon monoxide in a well, creating an environment conducive to lightning, completing the primal soup experiment, attempting to create life, but unfortunately, it failed. Nico walked towards the second well and muttered, "This well contains acidic hydrothermal fluid that continuously erupts sulfides from the deep sea. When it comes into contact with water, it turns into black smoke. It's also a method used to create life, what Muggles call the black smoker theory." Nico's smile faded. "I've lived for over 600 years, and I've been searching for over 600 years, just to answer humanity's two ultimate questions," Ralph pondered. "Where do we come from? Where are we going?" "That's right, actually, these two questions can lead to a third question." Nico blinked and brightened. "The origin of magic. We and Muggles are actually the same, our physical structures are no different." The old man's eyes shone brightly. "But why can some people be born with magic, while some wizards are squibs? Why can some Muggles awaken magic, while others remain just Muggles? They're all wizards, So why do some wizards awaken special talents, like Parseltongue or the disguise magus, while others don't? Ralph fell into deep thought. Nico pointed to the magic wells and laughed. These are the results of my research. Seeing the boy still deep in thought, the old man patted him on the shoulder with a smile, saying, I've thought about this for many years, but haven't found answers to many questions. You'll have plenty of time to think about them later. Come on, Ralph, let me show you the gift I prepared for myself. Nico walked towards the stairs. What gift? A coffin. A separate, unrelated section. I'm a dragon servant in the Dragon Clan, a new book by a veteran author of Dragon Clan fanfiction. If you're interested, check it out. Synopsis. I don't know who I am, nameless, without parents. I've been a wanderer since I can remember, and I was only 4 years old then. Perhaps it was good fortune, but no stray cats or dogs ever dared to steal my food. Until one day when I was 6, while wandering, I met a woman who claimed to be my master. She took me in, let me use her surname, and named me Xia Chen according to my status. From that day on, my life completely changed. And, she and I don't seem to be human. Chapter 131 The Book of Abraham. An elderly man with white hair, one hand behind his back and the other carrying a lantern, walked straight towards the catacombs, followed by a blond boy. Ralph had come to attend Nicholas Flamel's funeral, never expecting to be able to accompany him to the cemetery. It was a strange feeling, like following the spirit of the deceased to perform an autopsy, full of fantasy. The spiral staircase leading to the catacombs was wide and graceful, winding its way down 3 floors to the bottom. The old man casually held a lantern handle and inserted it into the wall. The lantern's light suddenly shone brightly, illuminating the entire room. It was an octagonal building with columns carved with alchemical symbols and ornately decorated vaulted ceilings. A faint scent of incense filled the air. Deep niches lined the octagonal walls. The first 7 niches contained 7 identical golden coffins. The first 6 coffins were inscribed with the date of the funeral. Only the 7th coffin remained unmarked. This is the grave I prepared for myself. I've already lain in the coffin. It's quite comfortable. Nico gently patted the golden coffin and smiled. I won't invite you to try it. Suddenly remembering something, Ralph pulled a nearly faded stone from his pocket and handed it to the old man. Nico took the magic stone, didn't even look at it, and casually tossed it far away, where it landed in a pool in the corner of the hall. Nico turned around and saw the boy curiously looking up. He suppressed a laugh and asked, Are you surprised by my attitude? Why did you just casually toss away such a precious magic stone? Ralph nodded. Go and see for yourself. Ralph slowly walked towards the pool. After seeing the scene inside, his eyes widened in shock. The bottom of the pool was piled with stones. At first glance, they looked no different from pebbles in ordinary streams and rivers, but after Ralph stared closely, he realized they were all magic stones. Most outrageous of all, even the pool itself was made of magic stones. The visual impact was no less than Loki finding a drawer full of infinity stones in the Time Bureau's office. Ralph squatted beside the pool, examining it closely, momentarily speechless. These are all philosopher's stones, to be precise. They're philosopher's stones that have run out of magic. Nico walked over, reached into the pool, pulled out a few stones, and handed them to the boy. These stones are like batteries to me, completely drained. Voldemort, hiding behind Quirrell's head, had spent a year, enduring countless beatings, all to steal a philosopher's stone, then brew the elixir of immortality and resurrect himself. What he considered a treasure, something he dreamed of stealing, was piled up like a mountain in Nico's hands, worthless as trash. How would Voldemort feel seeing this? Are philosopher's stones that cheap? Ralph scratched his head. He'd always thought a single philosopher's stone could last forever, but this entire pool of stones seemed to be being used up far too quickly. If it's just for brewing an elixir of immortality, a decent philosopher's stone can last a century. Nico leaned forward slightly, looking at the boy, and smiled. But extending lifespan is the most useless use of a philosopher's stone. It's like having 100 million, you wouldn't just leave it in a muggle's bank to earn interest, you would spend it. Ralph disagreed. If he had 100 million, he really wouldn't just leave it in a bank and live off the interest. Well, he didn't. Many of the alchemical items I make require philosopher's stones for power, including this manor and the magic well you just saw. Nico waved his sleeve lightly. These magical items consume a massive amount of magic power. A philosopher's stone that could last a century might run out of magic power in a few years. Gradually, This pool formed, are philosopher's stones difficult to make? Ralph asked curiously. Difficulty depends on the person. Making a wand is simple for Ollivander, Nico said calmly. But for some wizards, even with the best materials, they can't make a usable wand. Ralph hesitated. Nicole seemed to see right through him, her smile warm as she patiently asked, you want to ask, although many wizards can't make wands, there are still many wand makers. And in this world, there are clearly many alchemy masters, so why am I the only one who can make a philosopher's stone? Ralph nodded slightly. This brings up another issue. The old man winked at him, lowering his voice slightly. Only I know the method for crafting philosopher's stones. Other alchemists don't know it, so they can't craft them. Ralph pondered for a moment, carefully choosing his words, and slowly said, since only you know how to craft philosopher's stones, why is the method for preparing the elixir of immortality recorded in the potions book? Surely you didn't spread it. No, it wasn't me. Nico shook his head. Ralph, I didn't invent philosopher's stones or the elixir of immortality. They existed many years ago, but as I said, philosopher's stones are consumables. One day, they will lose their magic and become ordinary stones. The key is the crafting process. It's long been lost, yes, by the time I was born, only the method for preparing the elixir of immortality existed. No wizard knew the crafting process for philosopher's stones, Nico said softly. Later, I found the method for crafting philosopher's stones in an alchemy book, and thus became the only alchemist who knew how to make them. An alchemy book? Ralph raised an eyebrow. Yes, back when I graduated from Bugsbuttons, I became a bookseller, specializing in collecting and reselling magical books. One day I had a dream. At this point, the old man's voice suddenly lowered, and his expression became dazed. He whispered, I dreamt of a wizard who called himself Abraham. In the dream, he told me that I would receive an alchemy book, and if I studied it diligently and understood it thoroughly, I could obtain unlimited wealth and longevity. Nico's weathered face was filled with amazed reminiscence. When I woke up, I didn't think much of it, but one day, a wizard named Peveril came to pawn a magic book. He asked for a high price, saying it was an heirloom. Unlike other books made of paper or parchment, it was made of fine, smooth tree bark. I wanted to refuse because I couldn't understand the writing. Nico suddenly smiled, but I remembered that dream, and ultimately, inexplicably, I bought it, and that book contained the method for crafting the philosopher's stone. Chapter 132 The Stone of Destiny. Ralph listened intently. After all, such a secret story, intertwined with a touch of legend, was truly captivating. Would you like to see that alchemy book I call the Book of Abraham? Nico suddenly asked. If it's convenient, Ralph certainly wanted to see it. Nico snapped his fingers, and the entire scene in the room instantly changed. The coffin vanished, and the cemetery transformed into a study. The old man led Ralph to a chair behind a desk, where the boy noticed a very thick book. The old man handed the book to Ralph, who took it and carefully felt the bark before gently turning the pages. After only a few pages, Ralph was greatly shocked, because he couldn't understand it at all. The text was incredibly obscure and difficult to decipher. He didn't recognize it at all, as if he were reading a book written in heaven, and for a moment, he felt a headache coming on. These characters aren't English, Latin, French, or any other language that Muggles can understand. They're written in ancient magical script, Nico explained. I'm sure you've heard more than once that in a far more ancient time, there existed a magnificent magical kingdom. Ralph nodded. Ancient runes were the script used by wizards back then. Nico stood up, slowly circling the table, his expression excited. The magic of that civilization was far more powerful than it is now, far more powerful. The Philosopher's Stone was just the most basic application for them, like a Muggle's use of electricity. As far as I know, Hogwarts now offers an elective course on ancient runes in the third year. Nico smiled wryly. But in my time, ancient runes hadn't even become a systematic discipline. Only a few wizards studied it. Moreover, that magical civilization was too far removed from us. We could only slowly decipher those scripts through excavated ruins and artifacts. It took me a full 21 years to fumble with those scripts before I could barely understand a portion of that alchemy book, and then I discovered how to make the Philosopher's Stone. Ralph raised an eyebrow. He was more interested in Abraham than the alchemy book. It must be fake, unless he also appears in his dreams. Come on. Actually, I haven't fully understood this book yet. Many of the magical items it describes can't be created, Nico said, his expression somewhat somber. Because we've excavated too few ruins from the ancient wizarding kingdom, some of the writing is undecipherable, and I have no idea what it means. It's alright. I heard from my grandfather that the dwarves are also excavating those ruins. Ralph comforted him. You are immortal. One day you'll be able to decipher all the writing. Wrong, Ralph. I might not live to see that day. Nico shook his head. This might be my last funeral. I haven't crafted any new magic stones. I plan to exhaust my stored elixir of immortality and then meet death with Paraner. Why? Ralph was taken aback. Everything has its time. Everything has its destiny. The old man stretched out his withered, bamboo-like arm, his fingers stroking his frosty white temples, and murmured to himself, "This is the opening line of that alchemy book. Taking the elixir of immortality has indeed extended my lifespan, much longer than ordinary people, but my body is still irreversibly aging, unable to return to its most youthful state. My bones are very fragile now, even the slightest touch from someone could break them." Nico sighed. At this rate, one day my body will also decay. The philosopher's stone cannot grant immortality. Ralph thought for a moment and said, "Can I create a new body for myself? I saw such magic in a book. In fact, Voldemort's future resurrection involved creating a new body for himself. It's not impossible, Ralph, but a new body involves the transfer of the soul." Nico beckoned, and another book floated over from the bookshelf. The Theory of Magic. Ralph looked at the book. He knew its author, Adeb Wolflin, was a great wizard who studied magical theory and was considered the father of magical theory. Adebe has done extensive research in this area. I've had many in-depth discussions with him, Nico explained quickly, flipping through a book. After extensive research, the first fundamental rule of magic he summarized is that the soul cannot be arbitrarily altered. Once done, one must be prepared to bear the most extreme and dangerous consequences. Nico sighed. Creating a new, younger body is essentially equivalent to transferring the soul, which causes significant damage to the soul. The damage is no less than creating a Horcrux. Therefore, a wizard with common sense would not perform multiple modifications to the body and soul, including transferring the soul to a new body. What if aging organs are replaced? Ralph asked. Of course, you can use alchemy to replace aging organs. That's one way to try it, Nico smiled. But the end result is the alchemical transformation of the entire person, like a muggle robot. Would you want a mechanical body for immortality? Ralph frowned. Isn't there something like an elixir of life that can restore the body to a youthful state? Of course, Nico nodded. There's an alchemical substance with similar effects to the Philosopher's Stone. It can be used to brew the fountain of youth, restoring the body to youth. What? The Stone of Destiny? The Stone of Destiny? Ralph raised an eyebrow. The Coronation Stone. The Stone of Destiny was a stone used by ancient Scottish kings during their coronation. However, during the Scottish wars against the English, Edward I, the Longlegs, seized the Stone of Destiny, a symbol of Scottish royalty, and brought it back to London as a spoil of war. Edward I ordered the stone to be inlaid in an intricately carved high-backed oak chair as a symbol of his conquest of Scotland. That chair is the famous King Edward's chair. Potions made from the Stone of Destiny have the power to restore youth. Nico shook his head. But I checked, and Edward I didn't take the real Stone of Destiny, a fake one, Ralph asked, somewhat taken aback. Yes, Nico nodded. Legend has it that the monks of Squin Abbey hid the real Stone of Destiny in the River Tay. But with their passing, no one has been able to find it, and there's no way to make it, Ralph asked. At least it's not recorded in this alchemy book, the old man said. However, when Abraham appeared to me in a dream, he not only told me I would receive this book, but also gave me a prophecy. A prophecy? Ralph raised an eyebrow. He suddenly had a sense of déjà vu, remembering Helena for a moment. That's right, Ralph, Nico smiled. That prophecy was about you. Chapter 133 Abraham's Prophecy. Rove was now very sensitive to the word prophecy. Prophecies in the magical world weren't just tricks to deceive people, nor were they like the oracles of Delphi in ancient Greece, who always gave ambiguous predictions that could be interpreted in any way. For example, before Cyrus the Great of Persia and Croesus, king of Lydia, went to war, the Delphic oracle predicted that Croesus's military campaign would destroy a great empire. Croesus was overjoyed and launched an attack on Persia, but he didn't expect that the empire destroyed would actually be Lydia. Prophecies in the magical world rarely contradicted themselves like that. Instead, they would directly point to the key content. Whether it was Grindelwald's prediction of the nuclear explosion nearly 20 years in advance, or Trelawney's prophecy to Dumbledore 11 years ago about the Dark Lord and the boy, it was all like that. So, when he heard another prophecy mention him, a prophecy from over 600 years ago, Rove's sensitive skin tingled. "What kind of prophecy?" he asked softly. "Open that alchemy book," Nico whispered. Rolf carefully continued flipping through the pages. It was all unfamiliar text. He patiently turned to the 7th page, where a strange picture appeared, a large, leafy tree radiating light, with a dark green snake coiled within its roots. "Picture here." Rolf stared at the picture for a moment before continuing. The next few pages were also text. After 7 more pages, a second picture appeared, a naked woman holding what looked like a fish. Rolf looked at the fish, a hint of hesitation in his eyes. He looked up, and Nico, leaning back in his chair, nodded to the boy to continue. Still on the 7th page, a third picture appeared, the most complex of all, a room with a sealed box, on which a tree grew. A wizard held a sword, and behind him was a blue dragon wearing a hat. Rolf quickly flipped to the last page and looked at the 4th picture. A creature with ears as large as bats was wiping a very small cup. This alchemy book is divided into 4 groups, each with 7 pages, and the last page is all illustrations. The 4 illustrations form a prophecy, Nico said softly. Abraham told me that the 4 magical creatures in the illustrations will guide a wizard to find the relics left behind by an ancient magical kingdom. 4 magical creatures. Ralph crossed his arms and rested his chin on his hand. A snake, a fish, a dragon. What is the 4th magical creature? The illustration wasn't very clear, but from its appearance, it looked like a house elf, a fairy, or a dwarf. If that picture refers to Hufflepuffs, I'm more inclined to believe it's a house elf, Nico said softly. Rolf, have you ever been to the Hogwarts kitchens, sir? Every Hufflepuff has worked in the kitchens. Rolf leaned back in his chair and chuckled. The kitchens are right next to a common room. Then you must also know about the relationship between house elves and Hufflepuffs. Yes, Rolf nodded. Back then, the Hufflepuffs kept house elves in the Hogwarts kitchens to ensure they had work and weren't mistreated by wizards. That's right. Even today, many house elves are mistreated by pure-blood wizards, Nico exclaimed. And 1,000 years ago, the young Hufflepuff did something extremely noble. The Hufflepuffs and house elves had a good relationship. So I'm more inclined to believe that the magical creature wasn't a goblin or a dwarf. Rolf fell into thought. What are you thinking about? Nico asked sharply. The first time I entered the Hufflepuff common room, I saw a portrait of a Hufflepuff on the wall. In the portrait, there was a house elf. He was quite surprised at the time that there would be a portrait of a house elf. Rolf, you really are the person the prophecy foretold, Nico sighed. Although I've never been inside the Hufflepuff common room, I've observed that painting, but I've never seen a house elf once. Of course, what truly made me realize the prophecy referred to you was Albus telling me. Nico stood up, gently flicking his sleeve, creating a gust of wind. Helena found you and said you're involved in another prophecy. Resurrect her. That's right. Helena believes the silverfish you obtained is related to her mother, Ravenclaw, Nico said softly. And not long ago, you found Slytherin's Chamber of Secrets and obtained that basilisk, right? Ralph asked, somewhat puzzled. But the prophecy in your alchemy book doesn't mention the 4 lords. Why do you think the magical creature in the prophecy is related to the 4 lords? Deep underground in the British Ministry of Magic, there's a site called the Department of Mysteries. Nico thought for a moment and explained, but the Department of Mysteries has a history far longer than the Ministry of Magic. It was actually established by Ravenclaw. There are other ruins I've been to. Those places all bear traces of the 4 lords, but the items are all gone. Nico smiled wryly. It's like you enter an ancient tomb and find that all the burial objects are gone, but you see the names of the 4 lords. Wouldn't you assume that the burial objects were stolen by them? Ralph was speechless for a moment. That made sense. So the 4 great wizards were the originators of tomb raiding, and the most direct evidence is Hogwarts Castle. The techniques used in its construction are far beyond what modern wizards could achieve, Nico said earnestly. How could the castle's staircases have functioned for 1,000 years without a continuous magical power supply? And the Room of Requirement, even I can't build it now. The 4 great wizards possessed a vast amount of magic from that era. Helena did say that Ravenclaw's crown was a product of the techniques of an ancient magical kingdom, and she also mentioned some spellbooks, Ralph said after a moment's thought. So, you are the person prophesied, Ralph, Nico affirmed. Ralph frowned. Actually, I'm very curious why such a powerful magical kingdom suddenly disappeared. There aren't enough historical records to reconstruct the truth of what happened back then, Nico said solemnly. But we can still glean clues from other races. The old man snapped his fingers, and this time, some records about centaurs floated in. Among the centaur tribes, a legend has been passed down orally for generations, about an ancient war. In fact, the elves have similar accounts. Was it our war with the centaurs and elves? Ralph guessed. No, Nico shook his head, denying it. The wizards, elves, and centaurs were probably allied, not hostile. After that war, the entire wizarding kingdom disappeared. Historically, many wizards have tried to rebuild a purely wizard-ruled nation. Nico sighed softly, from era to Sumer to the Trojan War, where Hubbo's involvement led to the sacking of the wizarding city of Troy, and for nearly a century, Grindelwald tried to instigate a revolution, to let wizards rule the world, all to no avail. Wizards seem cursed. They have never again established a true nation. Chapter 134 Magic School Potions Tournament. Nico recounted the history of the wizarding world, from Sumer to Arad and Assyria, through ancient Egypt and Rome, to the conflicts between the medieval church and wizards, and even Grindelwald and Voldemort decades earlier. In his words, many pure-blood families with millennia of history had completely forgotten that ancient past, yet deep down they still retained the ideas of wizard supremacy and wizarding states. But wizarding states, like a cursive defense against the dark arts, always encountered various mishaps whenever someone attempted to do so. Later wizards and historians of magic offered countless explanations, but the true reasons have likely long been lost to the dustbin of history. To understand these matters, one must search for relics in the prophecies of alchemical books. Ralph was somewhat resistant to Abraham's prophecy, but his resistance was futile. The prophecy was there, whether intentional or unintentional. You would move in that direction, and even your deliberate avoidance might trigger its occurrence. Voldemort tried to prevent the prophecy from happening. He chose to attack Harry, and then, successfully marked himself with an adversary. Even someone as powerful as the Dark Lord is like this. Ralph thought about it and realized he really couldn't do anything about it. He could only say, prophecies are like Crazy Thursday at KFC, if you can't block them, just enjoy them. Nico gave Ralph a dictionary of ancient magical script he had compiled, more comprehensive than any other book. If he wanted to understand that alchemy book, he had to learn this first. Ralph wasn't particularly interested in Abraham's prophecy or the resurrection of Helena, but he was extremely interested in creating the Philosopher's Stone. After the chat ended, the tense atmosphere eased considerably. Ralph followed Nico on a tour of the entire pyramid in his alchemy room. Inside the alchemy room, Ralph was once again amazed, seeing many interesting alchemical artifacts, a stone basin that could observe what others were doing in real time, simply by throwing in a person's hair. It could observe them up close, like a camera. This basin was incredible. With it, who needed a pinhole camera? It was a live broadcast every day. An alchemical artifact that could predict the trajectory of stars and measure and predict the movement of tides. A flame that can turn water into oil. Were all those charlatans from my past life actually alchemists? Ralph spent a morning touring the pyramids, and by the time he emerged, it was noon. He headed towards the dining hall and saw Dumbledore at the entrance. Dumbledore was chatting with two witches. Glancing at Ralph, he beckoned him over. Ralph walked towards the three, glancing at the two witches. One of them was almost as tall as Hagrid. Although she was no longer young, she was well-maintained and still possessed a captivating charm. The witch wore a magnificent robe, and her neck and fingers were adorned with glittering jewels, making her even more beautiful and radiant. "This is Lady Maxim," Dumbledore explained. "She is the headmistress of Boxbuttons. Madam, this is Ralph Scamander, whom I just mentioned." "Hello." Ralph smiled and shook hands with Maxim. Suddenly, a thought popped into his head. One adult half-giant detected. Side quest triggered. Complete 100% taming of Oring Maxim. Reward, half-giant body. You can grow to the height of a half-giant. Quest incomplete. Ralph glanced calmly at the quest. After so many absurd quests, he was no longer particularly emotionally invested in taming the headmaster of Boxbuttons. He'd finally integrated into the system's twisted system and wasn't so out of place anymore. However, Ralph preferred taming a half-vessel to half-giant, but unfortunately, she hadn't come to the manor with Maxim. Of course, Ralph was a future magizoologist, and his interest in Vesvis was purely out of professional duty, without any other ulterior motives. Another witch, an elderly woman with white hair, greeted him. "Oh, young Scamander, long time no see," Ralph cautiously replied. "Hello, Professor Hicks." "Not so good." Hicks shook her head. "Someone stood me up, and I've been heartbroken for almost a year." "The person who stood you up probably had their reasons," the young man said with a forced smile. Larry Hicks was the headmistress of Ifamoni. Ralph had promised her he'd go to Ifamoni, then feigned going to Hogwarts. Meeting her again was indeed a little awkward. "Is that so?" Hicks looked at Dumbledore and smiled. "I was just talking to Albus, and he told me he invited you to Hogwarts, and you immediately accepted." "I didn't notice any hidden agenda." Ralph looked at Dumbledore, the old man raising his head, seemingly suddenly interested in the clouds above. Ralph sighed, somewhat aggrieved. "You forgot, you refused my request to bring the suitcase." "It wasn't me who refused, it was your mother, Professor Scamander, who made me refuse," Hicks explained. "I shouldn't have listened to her, especially after hearing about your outstanding performance at Hogwarts, Larry." "There's nothing you can do about it now," Dumbledore said lightly. "You can transfer schools." Hicks blinked. "Ralph, a dark arts professor just died at Hogwarts. You won't learn much there, Larry." "I've already found a new professor," Dumbledore quickly said. "Really? That's a shame," Hicks laughed. "However, a friend of mine who works in the International Wizarding Federation's education department told me that Ifamoni ranked first in this year's educational assessment. I think there's still a difference in teaching quality between the first-ranked school and the bottom-ranked schools." "Ralph, are you sure you don't want to come?" This remark made both Dumbledore and Maxim somewhat embarrassed. Hogwarts was at the bottom, and Boxburton's was even lower than Hogwarts. "What were you guys talking about?" Ralph awkwardly changed the subject. "We were talking about a potions tournament at Hogwarts," Hicks said. "We're planning to restart it." Ralph was taken aback. Dumbledore had mentioned this to him before, and he'd thought it was a joke, but it turned out to be happening. However, this matter did have something to do with Ralph. He'd mentioned several times that the educational level at Hogwarts was very different from that at Ifamori. Dumbledore had the idea of mutual exchange and learning, and was preparing to restart the potions tournament. If it went well, they would restart the Triwizard Tournament. "Will it be held next school year?" Ralph asked expectantly. "No, we need to observe for another year. I can't let my students spend a whole year in a dangerous school," Hicks laughed. "If no one has died at Hogwarts by next summer, I might consider restarting it." Ralph scratched his head. An immortal student was easy, but an immortal defense against the dark arts professor, that was too difficult. Chapter 135 "Shirley, what are you doing here?" The funeral lasted 3 days before finally coming to an end. Though called a funeral, it was more like a gathering of old friends. For the elderly wizards, this farewell might be their last. Or rather, the next time they met would likely be at their own funerals. However, they weren't bothered by this. Some wizards even made bets. The later someone died, the more they lost. Perhaps because everyone was so old, death, to them, was like finally going to bed after a long day. Ralph, as a young man, and having only been in his early 30s in his previous life, naturally couldn't understand this detached attitude towards life and death. After the funeral, Ralph stayed at the manor for 2 days before bidding farewell to Newt and leaving. He had arrived using Scrimgeour's key, and returned riding Maxim's French horse. A French horse, literally. Maxim had come to the funeral in a carriage the size of a house, pulled by a divine horse. Like Thestrals, the winged horses are also winged horses, but they are much larger and faster, and more durable than Thestrals, making them ideal for long-distance travel. The carriage traveled from England to Romania in just 1 day and 1 night, more than 10 Hogwarts Express trains faster than the Orient Express. As he stepped off the carriage, Ralph said goodbye. "Goodbye, Mrs. Maxim." "Goodbye, Ralph. When you pass through France, you must visit Boxburton's. I can introduce you to some excellent students," Mrs. Maxim said with a smile. "I certainly will," Ralph waved. After the carriage left, Ralph and Nit walked into the village. It was already getting dark. They passed a shop and stopped for dinner. The proprietress, Till, was a middle-aged witch. She waved her wand, and the ingredients automatically jumped from the shelf into the pot, swirled around, and then, steaming and fragrant, landed on a plate before flying onto the table. Ralph picked up a generously portioned cheese toast and took a small bite. It still tasted as familiar as the landlady's. During the break, Till came over, greeted Newt, and then sat down, staring at Rolf with a strange look. After a long pause, she finally uttered, "Rolf, I've watched you grow up, and I always thought you were a good kid. I never imagined you were like that behind the scenes." What about me?" Rolf looked bewildered. He thought for a moment. He hadn't skipped paying, nor had he peeked at Till showering. "What's wrong with you?" Till said, exasperated. "I heard from Catherine that you had a girlfriend at Hogwarts, but you dumped her and played with her feelings. You're only this age, and you're already a scumbag." Ralph almost choked on his noodles. He coughed a few times, took a sip of water to calm himself, and said, "Till, we can drink potions however we want, but we can't say whatever we want. What nonsense is this? Catherine is just spreading rumors." "Spreading rumors? I'm not blind." Till rolled her eyes. "That young girl traveled all the way from England to the village, specifically asking for you. Catherine offered her a room in the pub, but the girl refused and insisted on waiting for you at your doorstep. How could you do something like that?" "Grandpa, you keep eating. I'm going home." Ralph seemed to remember something, got up, and ran off. Newt was completely bewildered. Could it really be true? At Rove's age, he wasn't so bold. He'd blush for an entire afternoon just to say a single word to a female classmate. His favorite thing to do every day was to squat in the corner of the castle wall and watch ants move house. He could sit there all afternoon. This grandson of his is truly remarkable. Rove ran wildly along the mountain path, reaching the lakeside, where he saw a familiar figure in the distance, a slender, graceful girl sitting on the steps of a house. The girl's hands were supporting her chin, seemingly asleep. Her long, thin red ponytail swayed gently in the spring breeze like a tender willow branch. Hearing footsteps, Shirley suddenly opened her eyes, picked up her wand, and looked up, only to see Rove not far away. The girl didn't speak, but simply scrunched up her beautiful face. Rove walked towards Shirley, and when he reached her, he gently raised a hand, bent two fingers, and lightly tapped the girl on the head. "Why are you sitting here, not listening to Catherine and staying at her shop?" he said. "It's a bar. It doesn't look like a good place." Shirley turned her head away, her face contorted with grievance. "Catherine doesn't seem like a good person either. She keeps asking who I am and what my relationship is with you." "Haha, Catherine is definitely not a good person. She's been spreading rumors about me everywhere." Rove grinned, revealing a set of white teeth. "You're still laughing?" Shirley bit her lip, lowered her head, and said sadly, "You said if I couldn't stay in the monastery, I could come to the Romanian Nature Reserve to find you, and I came, but you weren't home. It's my fault." Rove quickly apologized. "I went back to England these past few days to attend Nicholas Flamel's funeral. I'm so sorry." Shirley stood up, surprised. "Nico Flamel has passed away." "Not yet, just a funeral." Rove took out his key from his pocket, opened the door, and looked at the travel-worn girl, saying, "Are you hungry? I'll cook for you." Shirley, carrying her suitcase, was silent for a moment, then nodded vigorously. In the kitchen, Rove cooked a pot of noodles, served it in 2 bowls, and added 2 eggs to each bowl. He placed the noodles on the table. The girl wolfed them down. "It's a little hot, eat slowly." Rove also started eating his noodles. He slurped up a chewy noodle and asked indistinctly, "Shirley, how did you get here?" "By the Orient Express." Rove asked, "Did anything happen on the way?" "No." Shirley shook her head. Rove frowned. Why did something always happen to him when he took the Orient Express? When they were halfway through their noodles, Nit returned, carrying a pile of food. He placed it on the table and said, "I brought this for you, Mr. Scamander." "Hello." Shirley quickly stood up. "Grandpa, her name is Shirley. I mentioned her to you before," Rove explained. "I'll tell you the details later." Nit nodded. "I'll go tidy up the room first." After Nit left, Shirley sat down in her chair with a sigh of relief, her palms sweaty. "Why are you so nervous?" "My grandfather has a very good temper," Rove said with a smile. "Just relax and stay here from now on." The girl gave a soft and finished the last bit of noodles in her bowl. "Are you full?" Rove asked. "Yes," Shirley smiled. "Already full? Then what's left in the pot? We'll have to throw it away," the boy said regretfully. The girl blushed, blinked, and whispered, "Then why don't you have another bowl?" "I'll have another one too," Rove grinned. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 136 Grandpa, don't overthink it. Lying on the soft bed, Shirley slowly opened her eyes. She found herself wrapped in a warm blanket, like a cocoon. She sat up abruptly, looking around, unable to recall where she was for a moment. After a while, she remembered that she wasn't in the convent, nor on the Orient Express she had been on for days, but at Ralph's house. However, the blanket wasn't wrapped around her by someone else. She had rolled herself up while sleeping last night. Shirley sighed, then lay back down on the soft bed, wanting to go back to sleep. It wasn't that she didn't want to get up, but the bed was just too comfortable, like sleeping in a ball of cotton. Before closing her eyes, the girl glanced at the clock on the wall and realized it was almost noon, already noon. She had slept until noon. Oh no. Shirley sat up again, somewhat flustered, quickly putting on her clothes and shoes, and began to comb her hair. Compared to Hermione's perpetually unmanageable messy hair, Shirley only needed a little combing to make it smooth. The girl picked up her hair tie again, simultaneously drawing back the curtains and opening the window. She saw a lake, shimmering in the sunlight, a truly beautiful sight. Shirley's movement slowed involuntarily. She stood by the window. The wall was covered in ivy, rustling softly in the wind. Shirley tied her hair into a ponytail, gently tossed her red hair, gazed at the distant blue sky, and stretched, saying, "So beautiful." The girl quickly left the room, glancing deliberately at Rogue's room next door. The door was open, but as expected, no one was there. Of course, it was already noon. Who wouldn't be up by now? Thinking this, Shirley felt unwell. Seeing the haphazardly placed bedding on Rogue's bed, the girl hesitated for a moment, then went in to tidy it up for him. She folded the blankets neatly, like a square of tofu cut with a knife. Such skill was something Shirley had honed in the convent. After tidying up, the girl went into the bathroom. On the shelf were the brand new toiletries Rove had prepared for her. Shirley turned on the tap, and the mirror suddenly cried out, "Who is the fairest of them all? Mirror, mirror on the wall, you are the fairest of them all," Shirley replied. HMPH, more like it. The tap started running. Shirley chuckled. She'd been quite startled the first time she used the bathroom last night. Just as she was about to take a shower, she awkwardly asked Ralph to turn on the water. After washing up, Shirley went downstairs and found the living room empty, but lunch was cooking in the kitchen. A botricle sat cross-legged beside the stove, lazily basking in the glaring sunlight, its eyes fixed on the flames, seemingly tasked with preventing the food from burning. Shirley checked. Lunch was almost ready. "Curious?" she asked. "Grote, where's Ralph?" The botricle raised its long, thin arm and pointed to the stairs leading to the basement. Just as the girl was about to go over, Grote pointed to a food box not far away. Shirley understood. She stood by the kitchen, waiting for the rice to cook. Once cooked, she packed it into a food box, then picked it up and headed down the stairs to the basement. Grote hooked his arm around the girl's clothes, swinging it in an arc before it landed on her shoulder. Shirley reached the basement, opened the door, and saw a vast forest. Having spent so much time in Ralph's trunk, Shirley was used to it. She looked into the distance and saw Ralph and Newt, then walked towards them. Newt stood in front of a ream cow, patted its swollen stomach, and said, "This is acute bloating caused by consuming large amounts of peanut vines, pea vines, or the stems and leaves of legumes like alfalfa. If treatment is not timely or the method is improper, it can easily lead to sudden death in cattle and sheep. The gas must be released immediately." Ralph nodded slightly. Newt saw Sherry standing a short distance away, carrying a food box in both hands. The old man smiled and waved to the girl, saying, "Let's have lunch first." He waved his wand again, and a wooden table and 3 stools appeared on the lawn not far away. Ralph hurried over, took the food box from Sherry, and chuckled softly. "I wanted to call you for breakfast this morning, but when I opened the door, I saw you wrapped up like a cocoon, sleeping so soundly, so I didn't wake you." The girl's fair face immediately turned red. Ralph opened the food box and placed all the dishes on the table. The 3 of them sat on the stools and began to eat slowly. At the table, Ralph continued to discuss the treatment method for the cow with Newt. Sherry didn't disturb the 2 of them, sitting quietly to the side, eating small bites, silently noting the details she heard, intending to write them down in her notebook later. After lunch, the girl cleaned up the bowls and spoons, put them back in the food box, closed it, and turned to leave. Newt sat at the table and suddenly whispered, So you just took her in like that? Shirley had nowhere else to go. Ralph sighed. You didn't see how thin she was when I first met her. She was eating bread that had been sitting out for ages. That's why I paid Shirley to be my assistant. You did the right thing. Newt nodded in approval. He thought for a moment, then added, but you're still young, Grandpa. We really are just classmates, Ralph said, somewhat speechless. The old man chuckled. He had also said they were just friends when he first met Tina. Ralph said helplessly, Grandpa, don't overthink it. Newt smiled slightly. I'm not overthinking it, it's just that having someone bring me food feels so familiar. Before it was Tina, then it became your mother, and now there's another one. It's so nice. After instructing Ralph on how to treat a cow's bloating, Newt turned and left the basement. Shirley had already finished washing the dishes. She came over and sat down next to Ralph, a little embarrassed. Sorry, I overslept. It's alright, I often sleep in too, Ralph smiled. My grandfather told me to tell you before he passed away, make yourself at home, Mr. Scamander is so kind. The girl breathed a sigh of relief, encouraging herself. I'll work hard. Is there anything I can do? Not yet. I'll take you for a walk around the village later, Ralph said after thinking for a moment. By the way, have you finished your homework? Yes, Shirley nodded. I secretly did it every night at the monastery, so I have a lot of free time now. That's good, Ralph nodded in satisfaction. He suddenly smiled and said, as my assistant, I'm going to give you your first task. What task? Shirley asked seriously. Let me copy your summer homework. I haven't finished my history of magic yet. Chapter 137 The Lost Key. Sorceress Village, the only wizarding village in the Romanian protected area, has many residents, but very few wizards are truly well known. Newt Scamander only stays in the village for a short period each year, but is a renowned magizoologist who even captured Grindelwald. Almost every local wizard knows him, including his grandson who spends his days wandering around on a flying broomstick. Therefore, the sudden arrival of a little girl at the Scamander's house quickly spread throughout the village. The girl seemed to have settled in, going to the village several times with Ralph to buy things, and even accompanying the boy to treat the village wizard's pets. The girl greeted everyone politely, repeating whatever Ralph called out, her manners impeccable. She was also extremely beautiful, though very thin. When a group of witches chatted idly, they would gossip about this, discussing her relationship with Ralph. Ralph claimed to be his sister, but everyone thought it didn't seem like it and preferred to believe Catherine's version, the scumbag version of Ralph toying with someone's feelings and getting confronted. Ralph was speechless. If it weren't for Catherine's half-giant bodyguard, he would have stormed the Green Dragon bar. Sherry didn't seem to care much. Or rather, she thought it was just friendly teasing from the neighbors. When she went shopping for groceries and elders deliberately asked why she wasn't with Ralph, she would patiently answer, he was busy. Although she said she didn't care, Sherry's ears would still turn red every time she was asked such a question, but she would never tell Ralph this. Only at night, lying alone in bed, would the girl occasionally think about it. Although he called her his assistant, Ralph didn't actually give Sherry much to do, at most feeding the small animals in the boxes. But the girl, who had just escaped the hellish convent, really put her heart into her work. After all, Ralph paid her so much and took her in. Not doing chores is unacceptable. Shirley started cleaning the house whenever she had a spare moment, from the first floor to the fourth, eventually even flying up to the roof on a broomstick to pull out the overgrown weeds. If Ralph hadn't stopped her, the girl would have even repainted the peeling walls. Shirley also bought a book called Practical Household Magic, which introduced many useful spells for housework. She practiced magic every day, learning how to use the cleansing charm to clean the room. As for not being able to use magic outside of school during summer vacation, she was in the Romanian Dragon Sanctuary, and the British Ministry of Magic couldn't interfere that far. With practice, she became skilled, and all the tableware and vases in the house were spotless thanks to the girl's magic. Ralph, seeing Shirley busy every day, couldn't help but think about buying her a maid outfit, but of course, he only thought about it. Newt went away for a few days, and when he returned, he suddenly didn't recognize the house. The last time it was this clean was when Tina was there. The old man also sighed. Ralph was incredibly lucky to have found such a helpful assistant. But he was also annoyed by their lack of self-control. Why did they spend all their time hanging around those nifflers and dragons? They'd finally come all this way to Romania, couldn't they take them sightseeing? It was one thing for him to be socially awkward, but the whole family couldn't be, could they? Newt, who was clueless when he was involved but became perfectly clear-headed as an observer, suddenly had a bright idea, and immediately kicked them both out of the house. So, Ralph had no choice but to take Sherry on a tour of Romania. Under the boys' guidance, the girls saw flying fish and groups of dolphins chasing each other for the first time, and even caught a sea monster with a horse's head and a fish's tail while sea fishing. She caught a moon lizard for the first time, and at dawn, sitting on a tree trunk with a boy, watched the sunrise slowly unfold brilliantly on the eastern horizon, the sea shimmering with golden light, a truly magnificent sight. For the first time, the girl rode a flying broomstick, chasing groups of dragons, their roars echoing and resounding. As summer vacation drew to a close, Sherry had already explored all of Romania with Ralph. Along the way, the girl with the ponytail traveled a long distance, saw many sights, and encountered many people and events. Walking along a quiet mountain path, with vines climbing the slopes on both sides, Shirley asked softly, "What are we going to see this time?" "To see the dwarves mining," Rove said. Shirley rolled her eyes at Rove. She could now clearly tell whether the boy was joking or serious. "Okay, I was just kidding. I told you before that the dwarves dug up a fire dragon fossil in the mine," Rove explained. "My grandfather said it was a fire dragon species that went extinct more than 10,000 years ago, much larger than the fire dragons we see now. I'll take you to see it." The two struggled to climb the hillside, where many tourists had come to see the ancient fire dragon fossil. Shirley stood on the hillside, raised her arm, stretched out her palm above her head, and looked at the huge mine pit in the distance. She was dumbfounded. A complete fire dragon bone fossil lay in the mine pit, more than 100 meters long. After watching for a while, as they walked back, Shirley exclaimed in shock, "I remember the largest fire dragon species right now is the Ukrainian iron belly." "Right, yes, but they were generally only about 20 meters long," Rov exclaimed. "It's hard to imagine what a fire dragon over 100 meters long would look like flying in the sky." Rov accidentally bumped into a tourist, who reached out and pressed down on the boy's shoulder. Rov looked up and saw a kind-looking, white-haired old man, tall and slender, but his face was covered in wrinkles, like tree bark. The old man smiled and said, "Be careful, child, I'm so sorry, are you alright?" Rov quickly apologized. "I'm fine," the old man waved his hand. Rov breathed a sigh of relief. Thankfully, it wasn't a staged accident. He and Shirley continued walking down the hillside. After Rov had walked a distance, the old man was still watching the boy's back. Suddenly, a very small snake slithered out from the boy's collar. The snake opened its mouth wide and hissed, "Are you interested in that guy? I smell a familiar scent," the old man hissed in a snake-like voice. "It's been almost 200 years since I smelled it. I feel nostalgic." "By the way, what are we doing here?" the snake asked. "Looking for a key, the key that beast swallowed back then." The old man took a step forward and appeared beside the fire dragon fossil. However, none of the wizards observing the fire dragon fossil could see the old man. He seemed to be non-existent. "It seems to be lost." The old man's eyes were calm. He slowly extended a hand, and with a casual gesture, the fire dragon fossil vanished. The old man's figure also disappeared in an instant, thanks to Trooper 1770 for the 10,000 coin reward. Thanks to Shameless Little White, Just Love to Wade Through Water, Ite Deote, and QQ for their rewards. Chapter 138 Smuggling. A newly unearthed dragon fossil suddenly disappeared. This caused a great stir, especially since it was lost in full view of everyone, adding a touch of legend to the story. The Romanian Dragon Sanctuary naturally launched an investigation immediately, but to no avail, as it wasn't a tourist area and no wizards had purchased tickets. The dwarves accused wizards of stealing it, while the sanctuary believed the dwarves had staged it, and a dispute ensued. Ralph and Sherry had already turned away and didn't see the dragon fossil disappear immediately. However, this was irrelevant to Ralph. He wasn't an auror, much less a famous detective, and had no interest in investigating the disappearing dragon bone case. Moreover, Ralph's dragon tamer exam was about to begin, and he hadn't studied for almost a month. But it wasn't a big problem. Ralph wasn't worried at all, and even took Sherry to go beachcombing, only to encounter Typhoon Mutha. Ralph possessed the bookworm magic word devourer, which allowed him to consume the words in books like a bookworm, converting them into memories and storing them in his brain. The boy's memory, previously poor, was now even better than Hermione's. Tests based solely on memory were a breeze for him. On the day of the written exam, in a large classroom, Ralph received many astonished glances upon entering. He was only 12, the youngest examinee, while the oldest was 70, a difference of 58 years. After receiving the exam paper, Ralph first felt the texture of the paper, then turned to the last page and began writing on the most difficult questions. This action truly shocked the proctor. The most difficult part was data analysis. The reserve would provide some case studies, asking examinees how to handle them. Besides concise wording, the key was to have substance. Simply copying from the data would definitely result in a low score. This was Ralph's forte, given his extensive experience. Thus, everyone witnessed a scene of utter disbelief. They worked from front to back, turning the pages slower and slower as they progressed, while the boy worked from back to front, turning them faster and faster, until the final swish of the pages made them question their existence. Ralph's written exam score was undoubtedly the highest. The practical assessment was even simpler. All participants were required to first go to the crater, find a dragon crystal, and then rescue a lost fire dragon. Ralph went to collect dragon crystals more times than he had galleons in his pocket, and rescuing the dragon was effortless. He was the first to complete the assessment, successfully becoming a dragon tamer and the youngest dragon tamer in the Romanian protected area. A week before the start of the school year, Ralph and Sherry received a letter from Hogwarts. The letter was simple, instructing them to take the Hogwarts Express from King's Cross Station on September 1st, and listing the reading list for the academic year. Lockhart's own books made up almost half the list, while other professors only required one textbook. He demanded 7. Aside from Lockhart's autobiography, the list was overflowing with books. This was reminiscent of Ralph's high school and his previous life, where, despite being science students, their homeroom teacher had even provided humanities study materials. And the answer was a refund later. As for the money, no one contacted Rove about how to get it back until he graduated from university. Later, at a class reunion, Rove heard that the class teacher had been arrested after being reported for his brother-in-law's bookstore selling large amounts of study materials to students. Lockhart was using the same tactic, just making a quick buck and leaving, not intending to fleece anyone a second time. But fleecing isn't so easy, and Rove felt it necessary to make Lockhart bankrupt this semester. After putting away the letter, Sherry asked curiously, "How are we getting back to England?" "By the Orient Express." "No." Rove shook his head firmly. He would never ride the Orient Express again. "We'll use a door key." "Didn't you say last time that applying for a door key is troublesome?" Sherry asked curiously. "Yes, so we're using an illegal door key." Rove grinned. Sherry rested her chin on her hand and sighed softly. She wasn't prepared to break the law. And the first time was so unexpected. A portkey, as an enchanted object, can teleport anyone who touches it to a designated location. Compared to flue powder, which relies on fireplaces, a portkey can be placed anywhere, or even be any object, extremely convenient. Most importantly, a portkey can travel extremely long distances, unlike apparition, which makes intercontinental or international travel difficult. Of course, to prevent the misuse of portkeys, countries have enacted the strictest laws, requiring authorization from the portkey office of the Department of Magical Transportation. Even Scrimgeour finds this authorization difficult to obtain, let alone ordinary wizards. But where there's demand, there's supply. Various illegal portkeys have sprung up like mushrooms after rain, making it a key target for joint crackdowns by various ministries of magic. Later, finding that crackdowns were ineffective, Aurors would impersonate portkey dealers to conduct sting operations. Wizards using portkeys would end up at the Ministry of Magic. Therefore, a safe and reliable portkey dealer is hard to find. Much like a ladder, who wouldn't want a stable and reliable circumvention tool? Fortunately, Newt, after being blacklisted by many ministries of magic over the years, has relied on illegal portkeys to secretly infiltrate various countries. He was an expert, a veteran of countless battles. Of course, Newt himself never made illegal portkeys, and he instructed Ralph not to either. In his words, the Scamander family doesn't do anything illegal. Early in the morning, Newt, Ralph, and Sherry paraded to the edge of a cliff. They waited a few minutes before an elderly wizard appeared. "Hey, Newt, long time no see," the old man said, giving Newt a hug. "How's business lately?" Newt asked. "Not good. That dragon fossil went missing, and suddenly the crackdown intensified," the old man complained. My sons don't want to take over my business either. Our portkey craft can't just be lost like this, can it? The two chatted idly, and a heated argument ensued over the price. Newt, surprisingly, became quite articulate when haggling. However, just as an economist can't outsell a street vendor 9 times out of 10, a magizoologist can't possibly outbid a portkey dealer. That's the nature of specialization. After a brief struggle, the old man pulled out a large iron bucket and made Rolf and Sherry hold on to it. Newt didn't take the bucket. He wasn't going to England, but to America to see Tina and, incidentally, his son and daughter-in-law. Goodbye, Grandpa. Goodbye, Mr. Scamander. Rolf and Sherry had barely finished speaking when they were pulled away by the door key and vanished without a trace. Chapter 139 Diagon Alley. The Leaky Cauldron, London's oldest pub, was founded by the legendary witch Daisy Dundridge and boasts a history spanning 5 centuries. Located at 1 Diagon Alley, Charing Cross Road, it's tucked away between a Muggle bookstore and a record shop, and is also the entrance to the famous Diagon Alley. Not visiting the Leaky Cauldron is like going to Paris without climbing the Eiffel Tower, or going to Shek without trying authentic Anhui beef noodles. It's just not the same. Therefore, first-time wizards visiting London invariably choose this renowned establishment as their first stop. The current owner of the Leaky Cauldron is named Tom, known as Old Tom, one of the famous Tom Cruises of the wizarding world. There's a long-standing rumor that the infamous Dark Lord chose to change his name to Voldemort because it clashed with Old Tom's. This claim was later indirectly confirmed in a new book by renowned journalist Rita Skeeter. The book mentions that when Tom Riddle first came to the Leaky Cauldron, he introduced himself as Tom, and the patrons jokingly called him Old Tom's long-lost son. The truth remains unknown, but Old Tom, as the owner of the Leaky Cauldron, has been quite diligent since taking over the bar. He has put in a lot of effort, especially in preserving the bar's authentic London flavor. When Rolf and Shirley pushed open the door, the Victorian-era grime on the bar counter was still clearly visible, the fireplace was burning fiercely, and the room was filled with a black, yellowish, and purplish-black fog, creating a pungent and acrid London fog, perfectly showcasing the atmosphere of Little Fog City. Sitting at the bar, Old Tom was teasing a dark green bird, whistling, but the bird was as aloof as ice, completely ignoring him. Old Tom, however, was full of fighting spirit, showing off his whistling skills with practiced ease. Several old women sat in the corner of the room, drinking heavily early in the morning, while a wizard puffed on his hookah, making gurgling sounds. Ralph, carrying a small black leather suitcase, walked to the bar and said softly, "Good morning, Tom." Old Tom looked up, his cloudy eyes wide, and laughed. "Oh, isn't this Ralph? Long time no see. Has your grandfather come?" "No. He's not in London." Ralph shook his head. "Oh dear, that's a pity. I was hoping he could take a look at it," Tom said somewhat disappointedly. "Look, I just got a new bird, but it won't sing no matter what, like a block of wood. How about I take a look?" Ralph thought for a moment and said, "Then, would you please take a look?" Tom, with a perfect London accent, picked up the bird cage and placed it on the bar. The room wasn't very well lit, but Ralph only glanced at it before saying softly, "It's all green and shiny, and it looks like a vulture. It's a harbinger bird, and it seems a bit down. This cage won't do, you'll have to replace it with chased wood." "Then why isn't it chirping?" Old Tom asked curiously. Ralph drew his wand and waved it lightly. A stream of water flew from a distant cup, like a miniature rain curtain, the droplets striking the harbinger bird rapidly with a crackling sound. The harbinger began to chirp, but its voice was shrill, like a funeral horn, startling the drunken old witches awake. "The harbinger only sings when it rains." "Hey, Scamander, you're a real expert," Old Tom laughed. "For that, I'll give you a 20% discount on the rooms later." He glanced at the girl behind Ralph. But she was wearing a sun hat, so he couldn't see her face. The old man winked and said, "Excuse my poor eyesight, who is this?" "She's my friend," Ralph said softly. "Please give me 2 rooms, I'll stay until Hogwarts starts on September 1st. "A friend," Old Tom seemed to understand, giving the boy a thumbs up and laughing. "Well, we're full, there's only 1 room left." Sherry naively thought there really was only 1 room left. The girl looked at Ralph, thinking that 1 room would be fine too. She could sleep in the little cabin with a black suitcase, and save some money on the room rate. Ralph shook his head slightly and said seriously, "Tom, 2 rooms? All right." Old Tom realized he had misunderstood, so he took out 2 keys and smiled. Rooms 12 and 14 are right next to each other, and they were the cleanest. Just let me know if you need anything. Rove picked up the keys, grabbed his black leather suitcase, and led Sherry upstairs. Rove, didn't the boss just say there was only one room? Sherry asked curiously. How come there's suddenly another one? Seeing the girl's bewildered expression, Rove tapped the brim of his sun hat and said, "Don't ask questions you shouldn't." The brim of the hat obscured the girl's eyes and brows. She wrinkled her delicate nose, gave a soft hum, and then lifted the hat. The first floor of the bar was filthy, as if decades of dust had accumulated, but the second floor was surprisingly clean, without a speck of dust. Each room had a brass plaque indicating its room number. Rove easily found rooms 12 and 14 and opened the door. The room was large, with a comfortable-looking bed and several pieces of gleaming oak furniture. The fire in the fireplace crackled. Rove opened the window. Outside, he could see the bustling streets of Diagon Alley. With a few days left before the start of school, Ralph and Sherry would stay at the Leaky Cauldron to buy books and supplies for the new term. After settling into their room, they went to the pub's backyard and stood in front of an outer wall. Ralph took out his wand and tapped the wall 3 times. The bricks shook and began to move, creating a small hole in the wall. The hole grew larger and larger until it became a wide archway leading to a winding, seemingly endless cobblestone street. The two walked along the archway and entered Diagon Alley. "What should we buy first?" Sherry asked. "Let's buy robes first." Ralph thought for a moment and said. "Robes take a long time to make. After we get the measurements, we can buy other things." They walked along the road towards Madame Malkin's robes shop. Ralph pushed open the door and saw a short, plump witch who greeted them with a friendly smile. "Welcome. Are you two buying Hogwarts uniforms?" "Yes," Ralph nodded. "Please stand on the stool." Madame Malkin had Shirley stand on the footstool first, then helped her put on a robe, pinning it in the right size with a safety pin. After taking Shirley's measurements, Madame Malkin whispered something in the girl's ear. Shirley nodded hesitantly, glanced at Ralph, and then walked towards another room. Ralph stood on the footstool, and after taking his measurements, seeing that Shirley hadn't come out yet, he asked curiously, "Madame Malkin, are there clothes for sale in the back room too?" "Yes," Madame Malkin smiled, her eyes narrowing, "but the selection isn't suitable for you." "Why?" Ralph asked, puzzled. "Can I go in and take a look?" Madame Malkin couldn't help but laugh. "Of course you can." Ralph pushed open the door, and out of the corner of his eye, he caught a glimpse of the scene inside the room, and immediately froze. The room was full of women's underwear. There were even adult witches picking out underwear. Upon seeing Ralph, one of them threw a garment at him, laughing. "Little one, come in and take a look." Ralph felt as if he were facing a formidable enemy, instantly dodging the large lace-trimmed bra. "Sherry, see you at Flourish and Blots later." A group of witches all looked at Sherry. The girl with the ponytail blushed and pulled her sun hat down, biting her lip as she said, "Idiot." Chapter 140. Are your teeth made of gold? Ralph practically fled Madame Malkin's shop. She was too fierce. If that lace lingerie had been hanging on his head, he might as well have reopened the shop. Ralph didn't immediately head towards Flower and Blots. In his experience, girls, when shopping for clothes, whether they actually buy anything is another matter, but they'll definitely try them on for a long time. He strolled around Diagon Alley, and as he passed a Quidditch shop, he noticed a circle of wizards and squeezed inside. Almost everyone in the crowd was a Hogwarts student, and Ralph quickly spotted some acquaintances. "Hey, Cedric, you're here too." Ralph patted a wizard on the shoulder. "Hello, Ralph, long time no see." Cedric looked at the broom and said, "See that? The new Nimbus 2001, how is it?" "A big improvement over the Nimbus 2000. The broom's length is increased, the ash wood has been replaced with peach wood, and there's a new color changing system. You can change the color at will," Cedric explained. "How is the performance?" Ralph was more interested in that. "Its startup speed is 1% faster than the Nimbus 2000, and its top speed is 5% faster, but the price is 1/5 higher. Even Nimbus is starting to squeeze out incremental improvements," Ralph said speechlessly. "The performance is basically unchanged, but the price is higher. There's nothing we can do." Cedric shrugged. "The sweeping series spontaneously combusts during acceleration, and Comet Company is barely alive. Nimbus has no competitors at all. This generation of Nimbus 2001 is a bit of an intelligence tax. Whoever buys it is a sucker." Ralph shook his head. "Someone actually bought it," Cedric lowered his voice. The shopkeeper just said that Malfoy ordered 7 Nimbus 2001s. Malfoy is going to donate them to Slytherin House, Ralph said. If that's the case, then that's not good news, Cedric sighed. Our Quidditch team, apart from your broom, only has a Nimbus of 1,700 at best, while theirs has 2,001 across all types. Even though it's incremental, they're still ahead of us in every way. Let Professor Sprout get us new ones, Ralph said. Impossible, Cedric shook his head. Professor Sprout used the donations from his distinguished alumni to buy precious herb seeds. The two chatted for a while, then parted ways. Ralph went to the apothecary to stock up on a lot of herbs. Ralph bought a lot of magical materials this time because he had received Professor Snape's potion-making talent, and for a year. Even with talent, you still need to brew a lot of potions to practice. Which sharpshooter didn't become a master by firing cannons? Just as Ralph walked out of the apothecary, someone suddenly patted his left shoulder. The boy didn't look to the left, but suddenly looked to the right. A brown-haired girl was crouching there, looking a little embarrassed after being discovered. How did you know I was here, Hermione? It's a little trick I got tired of in my past life, Ralph said bluntly. Hermione pouted and asked, where is Sherry? Isn't she with you? She's shopping for clothes. We'll meet at Flower and Blots later. I received a letter from her saying she went to your place. I was so surprised. Hermione raised her eyebrows. Shermie couldn't stay at the convent anymore, Ralph said softly. When she left the convent, she went to your house first, but found no one there, so she took the train to Romania. My family was on vacation during that time. Hearing Ralph say everything is alright, Hermione was relieved. She patted her budding breasts and smiled brightly. Luckily, Sherry found you, Ralph laughed. Why are you alone? My mom and dad are over there, Hermione pointed into the distance. Ralph turned his head and saw a middle-aged couple standing side by side in front of a shop, curiously looking in their direction. Why didn't you say so earlier? Ralph quickly walked over and greeted them warmly. Mr. and Mrs. Granger. Hello, hello, Ralph. Mrs. Granger patted the boy's head and smiled. You've grown quite a bit, almost half a head taller than Hermione. No way. I'm definitely taller. Hermione raised her chin, somewhat unconvinced. She gestured her height with her hands and found that she was indeed much shorter, so she secretly stood on her tiptoes, manually increasing her height. Hermione, why don't you stand on my feet and compare heights? Ralph laughed. You said it. The girl raised her foot, but didn't step on it. I won't fall for your tricks. If you get it dirty, you'll definitely make me pay for it. The little girl snorted and withdrew her foot. Did you buy so many books? Ralph looked at Mr. Granger, who was carrying a large stack of books. Hermione bought all of these, Mr. Granger said with a fond smile. She's practically emptied the bookstore. Put them in my trunk, Ralph suggested. It's too much trouble to carry them like this. No need, I can carry them. Mr. Granger quickly waved his hand. It's all right, Dad, Ralph's trunk can hold a lot, Hermione said without hesitation. It won't add any weight. Yes, Ralph opened the trunk and put the stacks of books inside. The Grangers could only marvel at the convenience of magic. Where are you going? Ralph asked curiously. My dad just saw a set of magical creature teeth he wanted to buy to study, but they're very expensive, 50 galleons, Hermione explained. We've spent all our money on books, so we're going to Gringotts to exchange some more galleons. 50 galleons, Ralph asked suspiciously. What kind of magical creature teeth are so expensive? They're in that shop. Hermione pointed to a shop not far away. I'll go take a look, Ralph said, walking towards the shop. The shopkeeper was pleased to see the customer return. He smiled and said, Did you bring the money? This is the last one, you'd better hurry. Ralph picked up the tooth, examined it, and said, 50 galleons? Is your tartar made of gold, or are your gums made of gold? This is a tooth from a Romanian longhorn dragon. Of course it's not cheap, the wizard explained. A Romanian longhorn dragon, Ralph scoffed. Trying to fool people with a boar's tooth, huh? 2 galleons at most, will you sell it or not? The wizard retorted. What makes you say this is a boar's tooth? This is my dragon tamer's certificate. Ralph pulled a booklet from his pocket. Do you need any other proof? Hey, young man, give me the cost price. 5 galleons. Ralph turned to leave. 3 galleons, the shopkeeper shouted. I can't go any lower, Hermione. Mr. Granger, thanks to Just Love to Wonder in the Water and Ate Deote for their generous donations. Chapter 141 He gave so much? Using hog teeth to impersonate dragon teeth, using harlequin feathers as thunderbird feathers, or passing off vixen eggs as harlequin eggs, these are all common and egregious acts in this industry. Many shop owners are adept at ripping off unsuspecting customers. Fortunately, Ralph is experienced, and with his help, he bought Mr. Granger quite a few magical creature teeth without any issues of inferior goods being passed off as superior or mislabeled. Mr. Granger bought these teeth to take home and study. This is probably an occupational hazard for dentists. Of course, Ralph's experience is limited to magical creatures. Magical items are not his specialty. Cry-finder swords, Ravenclaw tiaras, Slytherin rings, Hufflepuff cups, at a small stall, these are at best ordinary goods, worth a laugh. Ever seen Merlin's wand? Want to touch King Arthur's sword in the stone? Buy one get one free on the Holy Grail, and get a discount for bulk orders. Not to mention the J-tablets of ancient Egyptian pharaohs, the bronze tripod from last week, and ancient Greek sculptures made of stained marble. If you ask Ralph if they were expensive, they certainly aren't, but if you ask him if he'll buy them, of course he won't. Many items in Diagon Alley are like Pangea. There are good things, it just depends on whether you have a discerning eye. Ralph suddenly thought of Helena. Next time he came shopping, he could bring her along. As Ravenclaw's daughter, she might be a bit silly, but her eye for antiques was definitely sharp. It would be a shame not to bring her along as a treasure hunter. Ralph took the Grangers for a stroll around Diagon Alley. He'd been there more often than Hermione, so he knew exactly what shops were interesting and which could be skipped. Mrs. Granger seemed to enjoy chatting with Ralph, from his family to his studies, and then to his career plans after graduation, and which city he planned to live in. Mr. Granger had been chatting happily with Ralph, but after Hermione said he and Ralph were practically colleagues, he suddenly became withdrawn and silent. They ran into Hagrid and Harry on the way. Ralph waved and greeted them. Seeing Harry covered in dust, as if he'd just crawled out of a coal mine, he couldn't help but ask, "Harry, what happened to you?" "Harry just went to Nocturne Alley. I just pulled him out," Hagrid explained, brushing the dust off Harry, but he was so strong he almost shoved Harry into a dragon dung bucket outside a pharmacy. Nocturne Alley is adjacent to Diagon Alley, but it's far less famous, as it's a melting pot of dark magic shops and wizards walking the line between crime and evil. "I didn't go to Nocturne Alley on purpose," Harry quickly explained. "I stayed at the Wheel Eye's house during the summer holidays, and when I used flu powder, I accidentally called the wrong name, which is why I ended up there." "You're lucky you just happened to run into me," Hagrid said sternly. "Do you know how many wizards disappear in Nocturne Alley every year? It's teeming with dark wizards. If they catch you, they'll cut out your kidneys." "Then why were you in Nocturne Alley?" Harry retorted. "I was looking for a potion to repel carnivorous slugs." "None of the shops in Diagon Alley sell it," Hagrid said gruffly. "Those guys are ruining all the cabbages at school. You won't be able to eat cabbages for the new term. The slime of carnivorous slugs is corrosive to plants. They move much faster than ordinary slugs, and they are fire-resistant. Once they cause a disaster, they're very difficult to deal with." "Rolf, do you know how to deal with these guys?" Hagrid looked at Rolf. "I can try to brew some kind of insecticide," Rolf said softly. "Thank you so much. I was thinking of asking Professor Snape for help, but he always said he was too busy, so I didn't go to him." Hagrid grinned. Ralph, however, thought to himself that Snape might not have helped before, but seeing Hagrid carrying a bag of herbs last school year, he'd definitely change his mind. After all, Hagrid was giving so much. Luckily, Hagrid had a stereotype, otherwise Snape would have definitely made a fortune off the herbs. "Ralph, are these your parents? Your father looks different than before," Hagrid asked, looking at the Grangers. "No, Hagrid, they are my mom and dad," Hermione quickly explained. "Oh, sorry," Hagrid scratched his head sheepishly, then warmly invited, "Want to go to the Leaky Cauldron for a few drinks?" "My treat." Mr. Granger was tempted. Hagrid's physique resembled that of a legendary giant, and he was curious to see how Hagrid's teeth differed from a human's. However, accompanying his daughter shopping was clearly more important. Mr. Granger was about to politely decline when Hermione, understanding his situation, said, "You two go ahead. Ralph and I will shop around a bit longer and then come find you." "Okay, then you two be careful," Mrs. Granger whispered. "Don't go to that Nocturne Alley." "Don't worry," Hermione patted her chest and assured her, "I won't let Ralph go to places like that. I'm talking to Ralph. Mrs. Granger rolled her eyes at her daughter, then looked at the boy and smiled. "Ralph, you're a good boy, Auntie knows that. Don't let Hermione run around." "I know, madam," Ralph grinned, looking completely obedient. "Then we're off." Hagrid and the Grangers headed towards the leaky cauldron. Hermione was furious. She was clearly the good student who didn't break the school rules, so why did her mother think Ralph was the good student? Just because Ralph was a little better looking than others. The day he gets expelled from Hogwarts, you'll see just how bad he really is. Thinking of this, the indignant girl couldn't help but glare at the boy. "Hermione, don't glare at me like that, or I'll tell your mother." Ralph suppressed a laugh and deliberately put on a stern face. "You don't want your mother to know you bullied me, do you?" Hermione puffed out her cheeks and stomped her feet angrily. Who bullied whom? Harry watched the two bickering, but he couldn't get a word in edgewise. It was as if he didn't exist. He only had one thought in his mind: who am I? Where am I? What am I doing? Fortunately, Ralph still remembered Harry and didn't let him suffer too much. He turned to Harry and asked, "Harry, Hermione and I are going to Flourish and Blotts." "Where are you going?" "I'm going to see the Wheel-Eyes," Harry said. "Then come with us." "The Wheel-Eyes will definitely be at the bookstore too," Ralph said softly. Harry wanted to refuse. He'd rather go alone. Suddenly remembering something, he lowered his voice excitedly. "Rolf, guess who I just saw at Borge and Burke's?" Rolf, of course, knew who it was. He calmly replied, "Malfoy." "How did you know?" Harry asked, shocked. "I can't think of anyone else who could excite you like that but Draco Malfoy." Rolf shrugged. Thanks to Just Love Wandering the Water for the donation. Chapter 142. Where did the diary go? In this world, if there's anyone who can excite Harry so much that he'd drop everything to follow and stalk them, it can only be Draco Malfoy. Even Voldemort is second. Like in the original timeline, 6th year Harry, tasked by Dumbledore to retrieve memories of Voldemort's Horcruxes, such an important mission, could slack off for an entire semester, focusing instead on tracking Malfoy. The difference in their status is obvious. Harry felt something was off, and quickly explained, "I didn't intentionally follow them, I just accidentally touched them while using Floo powder." Lucius Malfoy seems to be selling something. Bokenburg is the biggest dark magic shop in Knockturn Alley. Malfoy can only sell difficult to dispose of dark magic items there, Ralph explained. "Then we have to tell Mr. Weasley," Harry exclaimed excitedly. "Speaking of Mr. Weasley, I see them," Ralph said, pointing into the distance. Harry looked up and saw a large crowd gathered outside Flourish and Blotts, with a huge banner hanging upstairs, "Gilderoy Lockhart's autobiography, My Magical Self, for sale 12:30 to 4:30 p.m. today." The Wheel-Eyes also saw Harry, Mr. Weasley, Percy, the twins, and Ron were rushing towards them from the crowded street. "Harry, where have you been?" "We've searched all over Diagon Alley," Mr. Weasley said, panting. "I accidentally went to Knockturn Alley," Harry said. "Great," Fred and George exclaimed together. "The adults never let us go there," Ron said enviously. Mrs. Weasley came running from across the street, dragging a little red-haired girl, Ginny, who looked like a giant toy being tossed around. "Oh, Harry, thank you, Merlin. I don't know what I would have done if I'd lost you." Mrs. Weasley hugged Harry. The Wheel-Eyes then greeted Ron and inquired about Charlie. George and Fred joined in, warmly putting their arms around Ralph's shoulders. They'd gotten along well ever since Ralph had helped them come up with the idea of a pressure cooker bomb to help them wash Professor Snape's hair during the final stages of the semester. Ginny jumped in front of Ralph, hands on her hips, and said, "Ralph, long time no see. I heard Luna and Mr. Lovegood talking about you, about what happened with you on the Orient Express. He didn't even recognize you, Lovegood. He must have said something bad about me, right?" Ralph asked warily. "How did you know?" the girl exclaimed in surprise, then couldn't help but laugh. "You have to read the latest issue of the Quibbler. It mentions you." Ralph frowned. Would Lovegood write something bad about him in the magazine? The Wheel-Eyes went to queue for Lockhart's autograph, while Ralph, with Hermione, squeezed through the crowd towards the bookstore. Hermione glanced back at the red-haired girl and whispered, "How come everyone seems to know you?" "That's what it's like to be popular," Ralph said, raising an eyebrow smugly. "You can't be envious," Hermione grumbled. "I'm trying to make friends too." "I can teach you," the boy said, holding up a finger. 1 galleon an hour, the girl rolled her eyes and snorted loudly. After a moment, she tentatively whispered, "Can you give me a discount?" "What do you think?" Sure, the two squeezed through the crowd and quickly found Sherry in a corner of the bookstore. Having not seen each other for 2 months, the two girls were very excited. Seemingly afraid Ralph would hear, they held hands and whispered to each other in the corner. Hermione whispered something embarrassing in Sherry's ear, which immediately made Sherry blush. Sherry straightened up, tickling Hermione's armpits. The two, closer than sisters, began to playfully tease each other. Ralph glanced at it and lost interest, then looked away. Girls fight by pulling hair and tearing clothes, this was too refined. He stood in front of the bookshelf, searching for the books he wanted. He had a year to learn potion making and planned to buy the advanced potion making textbook as well. A moment later, a huge commotion erupted outside. Someone shouted, "Fighting! Fighting!" The wizards who had been queuing immediately dispersed, standing nearby to watch this ultimate showdown between the greatest perverts. The two sides fighting were Malfoy and Weasley. "Where Weasley is, Malfoy can't be," was a saying that had always circulated in the wizarding world. It was as fierce as the debate over sweet versus savory tofu pudding. In the past, both sides had been mindful of appearances and wouldn't actually fight. At most, it would be like two cats meeting, baring their teeth and wagging their tails. But this time, it was a real fight. Lucius Malfoy, without using a wand, first threw a book at Arthur's head, then unleashed a flurry of wild punches, charging at Arthur with claws outstretched. Arthur Weasley, also without a wand, was clearly more adept at ground joint locks than Malfoy's wild punches. He first choked Lucius, twisting him to the ground, then launched a barrage of ground pounding. But Lucius was no pushover. After his first attack failed, Arthur immediately turned into a horse stance, attempting to attack Lucius's weak points from behind. Arthur occasionally used sneaky, underhanded moves, each one yielding results. Lucius even grabbed Arthur's hair, trying to amplify his bald patch. The two were evenly matched, truly lifelong rivals under Britain's excellent matchmaking system. Not far away, a slightly less impressive battle was taking place. Draco leaped up, his legs flying wildly, followed by a flurry of wild punches at Ron and the twins. Young Draco, fighting 3 opponents single-handedly, though displaying flashy moves, was still at a disadvantage, his neck gripped by Fred's arm. Even with his neck bound, Draco continued to kick wildly, finally spitting on Harry's face as if using water magic. The fight lasted only 3 minutes, ending because there were too many reporters taking pictures. Today was the book signing. Lockhart grabbed a few reporters, excitedly asking, "Can you include the fight in the report? They fought over my autograph. This isn't over." "Arthur, I'll kick your children out of Hogwarts and make you lose your job." Lucius's eyes flashed with malice as he beckoned to Draco and rushed out of the store. Bookshelves lay overturned, the floor a mess. Ginny was squatting, picking up her textbooks. Ralph walked over, righted the little girl's cauldron, and then bent down to pick up a tattered copy of the Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration. He opened his textbook, but froze. "Rolf, what's wrong?" Ginny asked, looking up. "Nothing, I'll pick up your books." Ralph tossed the Transfiguration book into the cauldron, then picked up the other books. His eyes were deep, and he couldn't help but frown. Why wasn't Tom Riddle's diary there? If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 143: The Mysterious Organization That Operates the Magical World. A long simmering feud erupted just as quickly. Men versus men, in a public place, without horses, hand-to-hand combat. The two involved were middle-aged wizards, prominent figures with families in England. Lockhart even claimed afterwards that the fight was for him. The grudges and rivalries of 3 men, the emotional entanglements of 2 generations, almost every newsworthy event imaginable, making the front page of the Daily Prophet that very day. For the last days of summer vacation, newspapers were filled with reports on the incident, providing in-depth analyses of the reasons for the Weasley and Malfoy rivalry. Wizarding experts even attributed it to the historical animosity between England and France. The Weasley family were red-haired, freckled, typical Celts, native British wizards, while the Malfoy family were Germanic, their ancestor Armand Malfoy having followed William the Conqueror, Duke of Normandy, into England, completing the French feudal conquest of the country. Because of his service to the French, Armand Malfoy was granted a large estate in England, where his family has lived for generations. It's understandable that Arthur Weasley and Lucius Malfoy's ancestors might have fought each other, creating a long-standing feud. This explanation isn't without merit. However, the real trigger for this brawl was Arthur Weasley's recent involvement in drafting the Muggle Protection Act. This law aimed to protect Muggles from magical artifacts. Under this act, Arthur, as the head of the Office of the Prohibition of the Misuse of Muggle Artifacts, had the right to search Malfoy Manor. Forced into a corner, Lucius went to Borgin Burke's shop that night to dispose of the dark magical artifacts in his home. This escalated the conflict. Of course, Lucius's disregard for decorum and public display of force against Arthur stemmed not only from anger but also from a desire to slip Tom Riddle's diary to Ginny amidst the chaos. He hoped to use this to open the Chamber of Secrets and ruin Arthur's career. If Arthur Child were found to have persecuted Muggle-born students, he himself would inevitably face public condemnation and scrutiny, and might even be suspended from his duties pending investigation. Lucius's plan was well thought out, but what puzzled Rolf was that he couldn't find the diary in Ginny's book. This didn't match his memories from his previous life. Had Malfoy changed his mind at the last minute, or had some other unexpected event occurred? In any case, Rolf's influence on the so-called plot was already quite serious, and his plot advantage as a transmigrator was gradually dissipating. This was unavoidable. After all, he was a living, breathing person, and any subjective initiative would have a butterfly effect. Since he hadn't found a diary, Rolf's focus shifted away from it. In the last few days of summer vacation, Shirley dragged him around London, visiting various famous historical sites. They also visited Hermione's house, where Mr. Granger gave them dental care. Not only was it free, but Hermione also gifted them the most expensive mouthwash and a whole bunch of dental care products as a parting gift. Mr. Granger could only sigh, this spendthrift daughter, why didn't she just give herself away too? On the last night of summer vacation, Ralph and Sherry didn't go out for dinner. Instead, they bought a lot of groceries to cook for themselves. However, they disagreed on who should cook. So Sherry suggested deciding the winner with wizard chess. Ralph was confident, as he often beat Newt in the past, and according to the old man, he had the skill of an amateur 9-dan in wizard chess. As a result, Ralph was utterly defeated by Sherry, who had barely played any wizard chess, and was left questioning his existence. This shouldn't be. Could Newt really be a terrible player? Defeated, Ralph had no choice but to cook. Norbert the Dragon's fire-breathing performance made the night even more perfect. After enjoying themselves, Ralph and Sherry returned to their respective rooms to sleep. September 1st, early morning, Ralph and Sherry took a train to King's Cross Station. It was sunny when they set off, but a downpour began while they were on the train. By the time they arrived at the station, the sky had cleared. It's fair to say that British weather is like a woman's temper, unpredictable. They passed through the wall to platform 9, where many wizarding parents were already waiting to see their children off. The Hogwarts Express was parked not far away, its scarlet engine puffing smoke. Ralph, carrying his small black suitcase, weaved through the crowd. Several students noticed him and began to whisper amongst themselves, giving him strange looks. The boy found it odd. Even when he received the special contribution to the school award last year, no one had looked at him like that. A brown-haired girl stood at the window, waving her arms and calling out, "Ralph, Sherry, over here." Ralph ignored the stares and quickly led Sherry onto the train, walking along the carriages until they entered one. Hermione was alone in the carriage, reading a newspaper. Seeing the boy enter, she eagerly asked, "Ralph, did you read yesterday's Daily Prophet?" "No," Ralph said, sitting down and shaking his head. "It's all about Malfoy and Weasley lately, so I haven't read it." "What's wrong? The newspaper mentioned you." Hermione held up the Daily Prophet, raising her eyebrows. "It's on the front page?" Ralph was slightly surprised. He and Sherry leaned closer, and their eyes fell on a large photograph with a headline, "A Photo of the Century." It was a group photo, with Nicholas Flamel and his wife, Paranerds, sitting in the center. On the right are Dumbledore, Newt Scamander, former Hogwarts headmaster Armando Dippet, and Gershilda Marchban of Wisangamere. On the left are former Minister for Magic Ferris Spavin, renowned charmzoologist Miranda Gossack, and magical historian Bathilda Bagshot. The photo is filled with legendary wizards who have left their mark on magical history. Of course, except for Ralph. He's also in the photo, without a seat, standing next to Nico, like a lackey. Among a group of white-haired old men, He stands out so starkly. Our special correspondent Rita Skeeter reports, the renowned alchemist and sole owner of the Philosopher's Stone, Mr. Nicholas Flamel, held a secret gathering in August. The attendees were the world's most illustrious and distinguished wizards, wielding profound influence in numerous fields. Among them were 4 former ministers of magic, 5 headmasters of magic schools, 7 recipients of the Order of Merlin, and numerous leaders holding high-ranking positions in various national ministries of magic, a household name in magizoology, a spellcaster, a historian of magic, a famous wizard. According to our investigation, these wizards, who are worthy of being called great, all belong to a mysterious organization, the Order of the Phoenix. Their leader is none other than Dumbledore, president of the International Magical Federation, president of the Wizarding Association, and first-class wizard of the Order of Merlin. Some say that the Order of the Phoenix is a mysterious organization with a near-global presence, whose members are organized and efficient, using their magic and power to attempt to establish a new order in the wizarding world, and are known as a group that manipulates the world. Ralph. Chapter 144 Malfoy, have you seen Potter? Is there an unseen hand controlling the wizarding world? Does a conspiracy to rule wizards exist? Who controls Gringotts, the Gold, and the Galleons, the wizarding financial system? Who is Minister Fudge and the mastermind behind the Ministry of Magic? Who defeated Grindelwald and Varian? Our special correspondent, Rita Skeeter, will unveil the mystery of this organization. Listening to Hermione reading the newspaper, Rolf said with a headache, "All right, stop reading." As a reporter, Rita Skeeter was undoubtedly successful. She could conjure up a whole series of stories from just one photograph. And readers loved it. After all, sensational conspiracy theories were far more captivating than mundane stories like attending a funeral. It could only be said that she chose the writing style most popular with readers. "Is it true?" Hermione asked, equally curious. "The photo is real. Professor Dumbledore suggested we take a group photo after dinner," Rove explained. "But the content is completely fabricated. We were going to Nico's funeral, and a funeral would definitely invite a lot of people. Besides, I'm in the photo too." The boy pointed to himself. "Do I look like someone who could join a mysterious organization that controls the world?" "Yes," Hermione thought seriously for a moment, then nodded vigorously. "You carry a box full of magical creatures, walking the line between crime and evil every day. Now I finally understand why you haven't been thrown into Azkaban." Sherry, never one to shy away from adding fuel to the fire, laughed. "And your strange magic doesn't seem like that of an ordinary little wizard. If I joined such a powerful organization, the first thing I'd do is arrest you too," Rove chuckled. "Then lock you in a little box and never let you out." The boy was immediately subjected to foot-stomping and waist-pinching attacks from the 2 girls. "I surrender. Stop hitting me, you 2 great legendary witches." Rove quickly raised a French military salute. Shirley asked curiously, "How did this reporter named Rita Skeeter get the photo?" "Everyone has a photo. She must have taken it secretly." Rolf thought for a moment and said, "Rita Skeeter was an illegal animagus. She could transform into a beetle, so getting this kind of photo was too easy for her. Looks like he needed to teach her a lesson." No matter how far-fetched the report was, the photo couldn't be faked. After all, the wizarding world didn't have photo editing software. That photo was indeed frightening, just like the famous Solvay conference photo, which brought together 29 of the world's top physicists at the time, including Einstein, 17 of whom had won the Nobel Prize. The photo in the Daily Prophet was no less impressive, a veritable constellation of wizarding stars. Rolf, standing in the center of the photo, was somewhat conspicuous and became the subject of attention. He was sitting in the carriage when the Hogwarts Express departed. More than a dozen students had already knocked on his door, claiming to be seeking treatment for their pets, but actually trying to get information. "Scamander, did you really join Nicholas Flamel's mysterious Order of the Phoenix, just like the Daily Prophet said?" A little Indian girl named Padma Petir asked in a clear voice. "Is Professor Dumbledore really the leader of that organization?" Ralph, who had explained countless times, finally gave up. He looked down at the cat's body and casually said, "What do you think?" "I think it's true. You're so amazing, treating so many animals," the little girl said with admiration. "Even more amazing than my dad." "Is your dad a veterinarian?" Ralph looked up. "No. He's a healer at the Indian Ministry of Magic, specializing in treating wizards with cow urine and cow dung," the little girl suggested. "You can try it sometime. It's very effective. When you become the leader of the Order of the Phoenix, can you reduce your summer homework a bit?" Padma Pettier said pitifully. I can introduce you to my sister. Ralph was both amused and exasperated. Who is your sister? Her sister is named Parvati Pettier, and she's my roommate. Hermione, who was reading the newspaper, suddenly looked up and asked. Yes, it's beautiful. I'm not kidding, Padma Pettier chuckled. When I become the leader of the organization, I'll definitely get the school to give you more homework. Ralph returned the cat to Padma and laughed. All right, your cat isn't sick. Go back now. The little girl said oh, and drooped her head, her eyes constantly fixed on Ralph. As she was about to leave the carriage, she whispered, Scamander, my sister and I are twins. We look exactly alike. If you don't like her, you can come find me. I'm in the next carriage. The little girl immediately blushed and ran out. Hermione looked up from her newspaper and said, Neville, lock the door. Neville, sitting by the carriage door, asked curiously, why? Hermione said irritably, it's too noisy to read. Neville was about to get up and close the door when there was another knock. He had no choice but to open the door and saw Malfoy. Behind Malfoy were Goyle and Crabbe, who seemed to be his two henchmen. Scamander, I've come to you to treat my pet, Malfoy hurriedly explained. What pet? Ralph narrowed his eyes. Malfoy pulled a bird from his pocket and carefully handed it to him. It was a beautiful bird, round and plump, with a particularly long, thin beak and sparkling ruby-like eyes. Suddenly, a ding sounded in Ralph's mind. Detected a pet golden snitch, triggering a side quest. Capture the golden snitch. Reward magic. Flexibility technique. Allows you to freely move all the joints of your body, allowing you to perform unimaginably difficult poses like a yoga practitioner. Ralph raised an eyebrow. Malfoy, is this your pet? Golden snitches are protectors of magical creatures. The golden snitch is an extremely fast bird, because its wing joints can rotate flexibly, allowing it to change direction with incredible speed and skill. In the early development of Quidditch, the golden snitch played an important role, but as the number of these birds drastically decreased, the golden snitch was chosen for the game. As an endangered species, keeping golden flying man as a pet is definitely illegal. I found him. Malfoy coughed a few times. I'll release him in a few days. Where did you find him? I'd like to go find one too, Rove said with a half-smile. By the way, have you seen Potter? Malfoy asked in an extremely casual tone. What, you want to fight him? Rove bent down to check Golden Flying Man's injuries. No, I've searched several carriages, but I haven't seen him. Chapter 145. A little touch and everything will be fine. If there was anyone left in the world who cared about Harry, it was Malfoy. Even though he was terrified of Ron, he still used the excuse of treating the golden bird to come in and check on Harry. Of course, Harry wasn't there. He wasn't even on the Hogwarts Express, most likely floating in the sky with Ron. This golden bird's wing is injured, Ron said, stroking the bird's head. Its wing is very soft, it will get hurt easily. Can it be healed? Malfoy asked quickly. Of course. Ron held the golden bird in his palm, gently stroking it. The bird trembled slightly involuntarily, and its injured wing healed at a visible speed. Malfoy had seen people crush walnuts with their bare hands, but healing a magical creature with bare hands was a first for him. Not only Malfoy, but Hermione and Neville were also dumbfounded. You said you weren't in a secret society, only Shirley remained calm. She had witnessed this miraculous scene many times before, and the girl understood better than anyone else that Ralph was extraordinary. All right, pay up. Ralph returned a lively golden flying man to Malfoy. 100 galleons, so expensive. Malfoy was shocked. He could certainly afford it, but 100 galleons was equivalent to 2 months' salary for many ordinary adult wizards. So much money just for treating a bird? Malfoy had inquired beforehand. Many students' pets only cost a few sieves. Why was he charging by galleons, and 100 at that? First of all, you're an endangered magical creature. I used an ancient healing method, which consumed a lot of energy. No amount of eggs could replenish it, Ralph rambled on. This secret technique alone is worth 50 galleons, and what about the other 50 galleons, the money for keeping it a secret? Ralph said matter-of-factly. Malfoy, keeping a golden slinger is illegal. 50 galleons to shut me up, is that expensive? Scamander, I really found this golden slinger. Malfoy, though wealthy, didn't want to be taken advantage of. He thought for a moment and said, I have some information for you, also about magical creatures. How about you give it to me for free? What information? Ralph raised an eyebrow. He shifted into a more relaxed and comfortable position in his chair and whispered, if it's really valuable, I can consider it. When I bought, cough cough, found this golden slinger at a magical creature shop in Nocturne Alley, I ran into someone. Malfoy leaned close to Ralph's ear and whispered, our new defense against the dark arts professor, Lockhart. Ralph was somewhat surprised. Yes, Malfoy whispered, he bought a magical creature at that shop and then left furtively. What magical creature? I don't know, the owner wouldn't say. Malfoy shook his head, but buying and selling in a place like that usually involves endangered species or very dangerous magical creatures. That made sense. Normal people wouldn't buy pets in Nocturne Alley. It's all about smuggling. For example, the golden flying man Malfoy had was smuggled. This information is good, I'll verify it. Ralph thought for a moment and said softly, Malfoy, you can come to me with any news in the future. Ralph ultimately only charged a friendly price of 20 galleons, and Malfoy left satisfied. Finally, he had made contact with Scamander, who said selling information wasn't a collaboration. The only problem was, where did Potter go? Malfoy decided to go to the restroom to check. The carriage fell silent again. Ralph stretched out a finger and rubbed his temples. What would Lockhart buy? Such unusual behavior, surely he couldn't have gotten his hands on Tom Riddle's diary? After all, he was at Flourish and Blotch that day, it wasn't impossible. Ralph was lost in thought, only snapping out of it after a long while. He looked up and saw Hermione and Neville staring at him. What's wrong? He asked curiously. How did you do that? Hermione gestured excitedly. Holding the golden flying man like that healed the wound. What kind of magic is that? I've never seen it at Madame Pomfrey's. The girl was very curious, so very curious. Impressive, isn't it? Ralph leaned back lazily in his large chair, smiling slightly. From now on, any of you who gets injured can come to me. No injections, no medicine, no pain, no scars, just touch the wound and it'll heal, pervert. You scoundrel, Hermione blushed and snorted. You've learned this magic, and all you think about is this. This is a very proper healing magic. Unlike white peel, it might leave scars, and it doesn't have the side effects of some spells. It has many benefits. Ralph smirked. Hermione, when it comes to healing and saving lives, why worry about so much? Can't we stop thinking so dirty? Be more noble. The girl ignored this twisted logic, repeatedly muttering, scoundrel, scoundrel, scoundrel. Shirley wholeheartedly agreed. She made a baseball bat gesture at Ralph, smiling softly. Here's a whack for you, to teach you a lesson for not being good and having all these wild thoughts. Shirley, whose side are you on? Ralph said fiercely. I'll dock your pay this month. The girl with the ponytail glared at the boy, but it wasn't very hurtful. I don't mind, Ralph, Neville suddenly said. Thank you, Neville. Ralph patted the boy's shoulder, somewhat touched. If only Neville were Navi. What a pity. Hermione suddenly pointed out the window and asked, what's that? Everyone crowded to the window and looked up at the sky. They saw an old Ford car, appearing and disappearing among the white clouds. Just then, there was another knock at the door. This time, it was Ginny and Luna, the two little girls, who came in. Ron, do you know where Harry and Ron went? Ginny asked. I've searched the whole carriage and can't find them. Yes, over there. Ron raised his arm and pointed to the sky. Over there. The little girl rushed to the window, practically going crazy. She shouted, Ron, what are you two doing? Mom and Dad have been looking for you. Harry, sitting in the car, saw Ginny by the window and asked curiously, Ron, what does Ginny seem to be shouting? She's probably envious of us. She wants to get on too. Ron translated haphazardly. A flying car. Students inside the train were running around spreading the news. Malfoy, who had just come out of the toilet, heard the news. He stood by the window, staring wide-eyed at the car floating in the sky. He rubbed his eyes in disbelief. He was so jealous. Chapter 146 The Suicide Truck. Ron Weasley. Modifying a Muggle car and using it for flight, is that a serious matter? Absolutely, because this constitutes misuse of Muggle property, violating Ministry of Magic laws. What constitutes misuse of Muggle property? Applying magic to something made by a Muggle and using it falls under the category of misuse. Given that Arthur Weasley is the director of the Office Against Misuse of Muggle Property, he is knowingly breaking the law, making his offense even more serious. Therefore, Ron secretly driving the car away and using its flight function is undoubtedly a classic example of blatant disrespect. However, self-destructing truck Ron hasn't yet realized the gravity of the situation. He's sitting in the flying car, leisurely enjoying the scenery with Harry, and imagining the jealous looks on Fred and George's faces when they arrive at Hogwarts. Inside the car, Ginny, pale-faced, has already written a letter to her father to prepare him. As long as he's not the last one to find out. While Ginny was writing her letter, Luna pulled her head out of the quibbler and looked at the blonde boy in front of her, her eyes somewhat dazed. "Love, did you have a good summer vacation?" she asked. "Yeah, it was fine," Love replied, looking Luna up and down. A wreath of willow branches cascaded askew over the girl's long, blonde hair. If you ignored her unfocused pupils, the girl seemed quite normal. "This is Luna Lovegood. I met her on the Orient Express during the summer vacation," Love quickly introduced Sherry and the others. "Have you read the latest issues of the Quibbler?" Luna tilted her head and said earnestly, "My dad wrote an article about what happened on the Orient Express, revealing to the public the truths that the Ministry of Magic deliberately hid." "Haven't read it yet." Rolf, skeptical of Lovegood's reporting, quickly changed the subject. "Did you and your dad find the bubble-nosed monster in Romania?" "No, my dad was busy writing articles and didn't have time to take me looking." Luna adjusted her flower wreath and widened her eyes. "I read Rita Skeeter's article about you, and my dad said it's all nonsense. The Daily Prophet is just a second-rate newspaper, nowhere near as factual as the Quibbler." Ralph really didn't know where to begin his comment. A storytelling magazine claiming to be factual? "What are you talking about?" Hermione asked curiously. "What Orient Express? What Ministry of Magic's hidden truth? There was a murder on the Orient Express. Ralph saved everyone on the train from the Death Eaters, but the Ministry of Magic is trying to cover it up," Luna explained. Ralph, who was drinking water, almost spat it out. "When did he save an entire train full of wizards?" "It's not that dramatic," Ralph quickly said. "The Aurors were transporting prisoners to Romania, and something went wrong. Some dark wizards tried to break them in, and I helped out a little. It wasn't a small favor," Luna exclaimed excitedly. "You caught those prisoners and saved me." Everyone's attention shifted from Luna to Ralph, who could only briefly recount what had happened on the Orient Express. "Such a big thing, and you didn't even mention it," Hermione frowned. Neville looked at Ralph with admiration. "Scrimgeour told me not to go around telling everyone." Ralph passed the buck to the Auror director. "So, the Quibbler is dedicated to revealing hidden truths." Luna placed the magazine she had brought in Ralph's hands, then hung a wreath on his head, and sang in a singing voice, "Exceptional intelligence is a wizard's greatest treasure." Then, the girl followed Ginny and floated away. Ralph took off the wreath and sighed. Lovegood was quite a character, raising such an eccentric daughter. When the Hogwarts Express arrived at Hogsmeade Station, it was already late at night. After Ralph got off the train, he found that it was raining again. Although it wasn't heavy, it made the air in the forest much colder, and even the platform was covered with a layer of ice. "First-year students, come here," a familiar voice rang out. Hagrid, with his burly figure, walked towards the panicked first-year students, still holding a small pink umbrella. Sure enough, only a macho man would use such a color scheme. Ralph and the other three greeted Hagrid, and then followed the other students onto a muddy path. A light drizzle fell steadily, with nowhere to hide. Ralph snapped his fingers, and the rain stopped falling on their heads. The water monster's magic, water manipulation, was truly effective. He could easily direct the rain to either side. Sherry and the others were used to Ralph's various magical abilities and were no longer surprised, or rather, numb to it. At the end of the road, at least 100 carriages awaited the students. The carriages were neither too big nor too small, each able to accommodate 4 students, with upturned hooves at the 4 corners and bells hanging from them. "Are these carriages magically powered?" Sherry asked curiously. She looked around but didn't see any horses pulling them. "They're pulled by thestrals," Ralph said, standing before a strange-looking magical creature. It was emaciated, with no flesh on its body, black fur clung tightly to its skeleton, every bone clearly visible, and it had large, black, tough wings. Thestrals are a type of winged horse, capable of high-speed flight. Only those who have experienced death can see them, Hermione, the know-it-all, explained softly. "That's right," Ralph nodded slightly, gazing at the thestral. Suddenly, a ding sounded in his mind. One domesticated thestral detected, side quest triggered, 100% taming of the thestral, reward, death coil, able to sense magical creatures about to die, quest incomplete. The group boarded the carriage. The thestral sped along, its bells jingling, quickly passing through a pair of magnificent cast iron gates. On either side were many stone pillars, topped with winged boars. The carriage accelerated along the long, sloping road, finally coming to a shaky stop in front of the castle. All the students disembarked, suddenly looking up at the sky with horrified expressions. A car, roaring as if about to explode, streaked past the walls, sparks flying, and crashed into the ground above the greenhouse. Soon, the deafening crash of the car colliding with the whomping willow echoed through Hogwarts. Everyone froze in place. The doors suddenly burst open, and out stepped a wizard with greasy hair, a hooked nose, and sallow skin. Professor Snape looked towards the whomping willow, his face beaming with excitement. He seemed happier than ever before. Chapter 147 Ruff, be careful when you're having an affair. A car accident occurred at Hogwarts. A flying car crashed into the whomping willow at 80 miles per second. If the whomping willow could talk, its first words would probably be, "First of all, I didn't mess with anyone." And then, "Die?" Such a spectacular entrance naturally sparked heated discussions among the students, who excitedly discussed the incident as they walked towards the Great Hall. No one cared about Harry and Ron's fate, but everyone was very interested in the flying car. Shirley loved the freedom of flight and often rode around in Ralph's modified Comet 220 in her box, so she was also very interested in flying cars. She and Ralph discussed the power source for the entire journey. After all, a car that could fly from England to Scotland couldn't possibly run on gasoline, right? Hermione, with her wide range of interests, even had a smattering of momentum conservation, constructing a perfectly inelastic collision model to calculate the internal forces. As the group parted ways in the Great Hall, Hermione had a sudden inspiration and attempted to introduce magic into classical mechanics. It's a shame the little girl isn't studying physics. Perhaps she could creatively propose a theory of magic beyond the four fundamental forces. Ralph walked towards the Hufflepuff table, and as he passed the Slytherin table, he heard Malfoy boasting loudly, "I don't like Muggle cars, only idiots drive them. But if I want one, I can get it right away, the most expensive one. Once, for my birthday, my dad wanted to give me a luxury tractor. I heard the Muggle Prime Minister and Queen drive those things around." Ralph was quite pleased that Malfoy didn't mention the Queen driving a van. As he sat down at the Hufflepuff table, he saw Justin and Macmillan arguing. They were discussing which was more comfortable to ride in, a car or a flying broomstick. Judging from Justin's tone, it seemed he spent most of his childhood racing through the streets. Macmillan, on the other hand, criticized the safety of cars. Once, a car crashed into his backyard, collapsing the doghouse. Justin pulled out a Muggle car show magazine from somewhere, filled with bikini-clad car models with long legs. Macmillan stared at the glaring white headlights, immediately admitting defeat and acknowledging that Muggle cars were more comfortable. He had even made plans with Justin to go see the car models, the car show, at Christmas. Hannah and Susan, surprisingly, weren't arguing. Instead, they were frantically finishing their summer homework. At the Hufflepuff dining table, a quarter of the students were working on their assignments, their pens flying across the paper, unleashing their full potential. You thought the remaining 3/4 had finished? Wrong. Half of the Hufflepuffs planned to get up early tomorrow to copy their homework, and the other half were ready to give up and not do it at all. The entire Great Hall was in an uproar, so much so that when the Sorting Hat sang, the students were all busy with their own things. When the song ended, there was only sparse applause. Even the twins didn't participate. After all, their younger brother had secretly driven off in a car and his fate was still unknown. The Sorting Hat grumbled, "Everyone seems a bit unenthusiastic this year." This was a song it had spent a whole year coming up with. While not as good as its earlier works, it wasn't bad either. Professor McGonagall pulled out a large roll of parchment. She didn't speak, her face stern, her lips tightly pressed together. If it weren't for the Sorting Hat, she would have already stormed into Snape's office to confront Potter and Weasley about this. Seeing McGonagall remain silent, the Sorting Hat stubbornly continued humming its own self-composed song. Professor McGonagall finally looked up and said, "Please, have mercy on my ears. I'm in a bad mood today, little McGonagall." What happened? A student drove a modified flying car to school, and a Muggle saw it, Professor McGonagall said irritably. This has already made it into the Daily Prophet. Was it a Gryffindor student? The Sorting Hat asked cautiously. Professor McGonagall clutched the parchment, staring at the Sorting Hat. "Why do you think it's a Gryffindor student?" she asked. "I can't think of any other house besides Gryffindor that would do something like this." the Sorting Hat whispered. Professor McGonagall felt a pang of hurt and sadness. Why were the most mischievous students always in Gryffindor? When you're sorting, can you please put some effort into it and put the good, well-behaved students in Gryffindor? Professor McGonagall suggested. Hermione Granger would be great, and Shirley Swinton from Ravenclaw would be good too. What about Rolf Scamander? The Sorting Hat quickly pressed. Remembering her own experience of being sorted, Professor McGonagall waved her hand hastily. Let's forget about Scamander. I want to live a few more years. Professor McGonagall ended the conversation and let the waiting wizards begin the sorting process. One by one, they walked to the three-legged stool and put the tattered hat on their heads. Rolf stared at the Sorting Hat, suddenly recalling the third illustration in Nicholas C.S.A.'s Book of Abraham, a room with a sealed box and a tree growing on it. A wizard held a sword, and behind him was a green dragon wearing a hat. If the illustration depicted Gryffindor, the sword was probably the sword of Gryffindor, and the green dragon's hat, could it be the Sorting Hat? Rolf drifted off into thought. Professor McGonagall had finished reading the new students' names. She picked up the Sorting Hat in her stool and immediately headed out of the Great Hall. Everyone stared in disbelief. Surely she wasn't going to hit anyone with a stool? Professor Dumbledore stood up, smiling at all the students, and opened his arms in a welcoming gesture. I only have one thing to say to you, the headmaster's deep voice echoed in the Great Hall. Enjoy the dinner. Suddenly, all the empty plates on the table were piled high with food. How did he do that? Neville, his mouth full of bread and fried fish, gulped down a mouthful of juice and asked, did Dumbledore conjure this food out of thin air with magic? No, food is the first of the 5 exceptions to the Gump's fundamental laws of transfiguration. No one can conjure edible food out of thin air, Ralph explained. Professor Dumbledore used a transfer charm to move the food prepared by the house elves in the kitchen over. You almost missed out on this delicious food, the fat monk floated over. What happened? Ralph looked up and asked. Peeves caused trouble in the kitchen and almost ruined the dinner, the fat monk sighed. Why did he do that? Neville asked curiously. Peeves wanted to attend the dinner, but everyone thought he would cause chaos. Bloody Barrow called a ghost meeting. I was advocating for giving him this opportunity. Bloody Barrow firmly disagreed. Is Bloody Barrow very influential among the ghosts? Ralph narrowed his eyes. He's more than just prestigious, the fat monk shook his head. Only he can keep Peeves in check, though I don't know why. By the way, Ralph, the fat monk whispered, a ghost asked me to tell you she's looking for you in the Hufflepuff common room at midnight. Be careful of Barrow the Bloody, he added cautiously. There's been a rumor that he likes the one in Ravenclaw. You'd better not let him know. You two are secretly dating. It sounds like they were having an affair. Ralph is an innocent, honest man. Chapter 148 Lockhart. The fat monk had come to deliver a message, but he clearly misunderstood, thinking Ralph was having a tryst with Lady Grey. A tale of love between a human and a ghost lingered, and the fat monk could only marvel at Lady Grey's charm, unaware that it was Helena who was simply deluding herself. The banquet had barely begun when Dumbledore rose and left. Seeing the headmaster depart, the students resumed their heated discussions. Everyone speculated whether Harry and Ron were going to be expelled, or if they had been in a car accident, or if they had already died. Within a short time, the entire Great Hall was filled with a poignant story of Potter and Weasley's tragic end. However, Dumbledore only left for 10 minutes before returning to the Great Hall, followed by Professor McGonagall. Snape didn't return until almost the end of the banquet, his face stern, but unable to hide the joy in his eyes. Ralph, who was enjoying dessert, noticed several willow leaves still stuck to Snape's robes, and his heart skipped a beat. He was still thinking of sneaking away in the middle of the night to retrieve the remains of the Whomping Willow, but had Snape beaten him to it? Professor Snape, as if sensing his presence, looked up, his gaze sweeping over Scamander without lingering, but a contemptuous smile still played on his lips. Dumbledore stood up, wearing a magnificent sky-blue robe with a silver-trimmed collar and gold tassels adorned with fine pearls. His several-foot-long hair and beard were impeccably groomed, gleaming in the candlelight. Welcome everyone to Hogwarts for the new school year. Before the banquet concludes, I have a few words to say. First, regarding the way to get to Hogwarts, Dumbledore's sharp eyes swept around the room, and he said in a deep voice, traveling by express train is a tradition of the school for nearly 2 centuries, and it's also a requirement of the Ministry of Magic. We prohibit students from using any means other than trains to get to school, including flying broomsticks, muggle vehicles, apparition, and so on. Today, two students arrived at school in a muggle car and even hit the Whomping Willow, nearly causing an accident. I don't want this behavior to be celebrated as an honor. On the contrary, it violates the statute of secrecy and a series of other regulations. All the young wizards looked quietly at Dumbledore. It was the first time they had seen the headmaster so angry. Those two students will certainly receive their due punishment, but I must emphasize, Dumbledore said solemnly, if you miss the express train, or cannot get to platform 9, write to the headmaster, and the school will send a teacher to the station to guide you. But please do not take it upon yourself to use your own methods to get to the school. The Great Hall was silent. The thoughts that some students had actually considered imitating him vanished instantly. As for the second matter, Dumbledore cleared his throat, his eyes deep. We recently lost Professor Quirrell, but today we welcome a new defense against the dark arts teacher, Professor Lockhart. Dumbledore, who had just been very serious, suddenly smiled with relief, seemingly happy about the arrival of his new colleague. He raised his arm and said, Professor Lockhart's resolute dedication to education has deeply moved me. Let us welcome him with the warmest applause. Applause and cheers erupted in the Great Hall, mostly from the girls. Lockhart was renowned, a recipient of the Order of Merlin, and most importantly, incredibly handsome. That alone was enough to excite the young witches. His arrival undoubtedly raised the average attractiveness of the Hogwarts faculty. Of course, this average was still quite low, given the large number of those who dragged the class down, making the minimum acceptable level too low. For example, Snape, who had consistently ranked first in the most hated professors list for 11 consecutive years. Thank you for the welcome. Gilderoy Lockhart, dressed in a light green robe, stood up, looked around, and smiled with satisfaction. Years ago, when he entered the school, he thought he would be the center of attention, because he saw himself as an undisputed, powerful genius. But he eventually discovered that he was just an ordinary person, not the best student. Now, after tireless effort, he returned with a plethora of honors, and seeing these familiar faces of the faculty and staff filled him with unspeakable pride. Lockhart cleared his throat and said warmly, many years ago, I was as young as you all, studying at Hogwarts. Back then, I told myself that one day I would repay my alma mater for the education and nurturing I received. Today, I have achieved some small accomplishments, the Order of Merlin, 3rd class, an honorary member of the League Against the Dark Arts, and 5 times the Most Charming Smile award from Wizarding Weekly. I don't mean to mention these, but every time I hear others mention them, I think, Lockhart smiled contentedly, it's time for me, laden with honors, to return. Lockhart, a renowned author, was quite eloquent. Reciting his carefully prepared speech, he began, I know you've never had a reliable defense against the dark arts, Professor, but that's all right. I'm here, and your defense against the dark arts is saved. I'm here, and Hogwarts educational standards will rise. Applause erupted again. Lockhart raised his arm and said, of course, I'm not saying Professor Snape, who temporarily taught this class, was incompetent, but he was, after all, just a potion-making teacher. His level of defense against the dark arts might indeed have been less than satisfactory. All eyes turned to Snape, whose sallow face grew even more yellow. Speaking of potions, Lockhart grinned, I do have some talent in this area. If you have any questions, you can ask me after class. I don't think Professor Snape would mind. The students were dumbfounded. Looking at Snape again, his face turned from yellow to black, becoming quite unpleasant. Of course, Lockhart turned his head and said, I must thank Professor Dumbledore for giving me this opportunity. I will do my best to help you. If you don't have the energy, you can also teach me some small tasks. I'm young and not afraid of getting tired. Dumbledore raised his eyebrows, and Lockhart practically said, you're getting old, you should step down as headmaster. Lockhart continued his incessant speech, and Professor Sprout whispered, Merlin, how much longer is he going to talk? You should ask how much longer he'll stay at Hogwarts. Professor McGonagall said softly. I probably can't tolerate him for more than a month. Professor Flitwick, is this a graduate of your house? Professor Sprout turned his head and asked. Every house has a few problematic students, doesn't it? Professor Flitwick sighed. What a disaster. Chapter 149 Scumbag Male and Green Tea Female. In the headmaster's office, Dumbledore pushed open the door and entered, finding Professor McGonagall already in the room. Professor McGonagall was sitting in a chair, listening to the Sorting Hat's horse singing, but her stern face and tightly pursed lips betrayed her near limit. Minerva, what are you doing here? Dumbledore asked in surprise. "I came to report to you," Professor McGonagall replied, somewhat puzzled. "Where have you been?" Usually, after the dinner party, Dumbledore would go straight to his office. She had waited for ages without seeing him. The wait itself wasn't so bad, but being tormented by the Sorting Hat's noise was unbearable. "I just went to Poppy's for a dental appointment," Dumbledore said, walking over and sitting down in the chair. "Didn't you just lose a tooth last year?" Professor McGonagall asked in surprise. "You said Miss Granger's father's treatment skills were quite good." "That was a tooth on the left," Dumbledore chuckled. "This time it's a tooth on the right. It was hurting terribly just now, probably because I ate too many chocolate cheese Martian bars. You shouldn't eat so many sweets anymore." "Oh, I finally had some free time to go to the Muggle supermarket, and brought back quite a lot of stockpile goods." "You ate all of your stockpile goods, without realizing it?" "Don't be nervous, Minerva. I actually wanted to share some with you." Professor McGonagall couldn't help but glare at Dumbledore. Was that what she meant? "Minerva, what do you want to report to me about?" Dumbledore stared at Professor McGonagall. The portraits of the past Hogwarts headmasters hanging on the walls stopped pretending to be asleep and quietly opened their eyes to eavesdrop. What else could it be? A wizard with a goatee, dressed in silver and green Slytherin attire, sneered on the wall. It must be about those two students riding flying cars to school. Has Gryffindor really fallen this low, Phineas? Rest assured, in this respect, Slytherin and Gryffindor are evenly matched, a Gryffindor headmaster retorted. The portraits began to argue amongst themselves. Professor McGonagall ignored the portrait's commotion and said in a low voice, "Professor Dumbledore, I asked Potter again, and he's quite certain the wall at Platform 9 is impassable, but the wheel eyes just went in before that." "That's certainly something that's never happened before," Dumbledore said, his eyes deep. "Sealing that entrance would require a great deal of magic. It couldn't be a student's prank." "Potter might be lying," Phineas interjected. "A student like that, if it were in my time, would have been hanging in the dungeon and whipped." "Thank you for your suggestion, Phineas." Dumbledore leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "But I believe Potter and the Wheel Eyes aren't lying." "I'll investigate this," Dumbledore said calmly. "Anything else, Minerva?" "Pomona and the others asked me to inquire how long Lockhart plans to stay here," Professor McGonagall said softly. "Based on past experience, I think he won't stay more than a year," Dumbledore chuckled. "A year? I probably couldn't even stand a week," Professor McGonagall sighed. "I still remember what Lockhart was like when he was in school. He told everyone he would create the Philosopher's Stone before graduation, he would lead the England Quidditch team to victory in the World Cup. And he even said he would become the youngest minister for magic in Britain." When he graduated, I breathed a huge sigh of relief. I never expected him to come back. "And what he wrote, how much of it was true?" Professor McGonagall asked. "The things may all be true, but they weren't Lockhart's doing." Dumbledore adjusted his glasses. "Minerva, I happen to have a few friends who, after interacting with Lockhart, forgot some important things, and those things they forgot have brazenly appeared in Lockhart's books. The protagonist has also transformed into Lockhart himself." "How dare he?" Professor McGonagall looked astonished. She had thought Lockhart was just bragging, but she hadn't expected him to have done something like this. "I believe that if Lockhart is kept at Hogwarts, he will be exposed sooner or later," Dumbledore said softly. "But what can students learn from a teacher like that?" Professor McGonagall asked, puzzled. Dumbledore turned to look out the window and said slowly, "Students can learn a lot from such a bad teacher. What not to do, what not to be, Minerva, you know? Sometimes I feel our education is too simplistic, only teaching students magic without properly guiding them so they don't go down the wrong path. Lockhart is where our education fails." The old man stood up and said softly, "How many roads must one walk to be worthy of the title of man? These lessons are sometimes more important than magic itself." Professor McGonagall lowered her head in thought. Late at night, in the Hufflepuff common room, Ralph, wearing loose pajamas, sat cross-legged on the sofa, resting with his eyes closed. After some time, he heard a soft rustling sound. The boy opened his eyes and saw a ghost in a long dress float through the wall into the Hufflepuff common room. Without any pleasantries, Ralph cut straight to the point. "The fat monk said you wanted to see me." Helena sat down beside him and said softly, "I saw the newspaper. It said you attended Nicholas Flamel's secret meeting." "It wasn't a secret meeting, just Nicholas's funeral." Ralph knew what she was thinking and explained, "I asked around for you. Even someone like Nicholas Flamel couldn't withstand the ravages of time, And he certainly didn't know how to resurrect you. The long-haired female ghost didn't speak, but simply sat down beside the boy with her knees drawn up, looking utterly pitiful. Ralph ignored Helena's gloomy face. After a moment's thought, he pointed to the Hufflepuff portrait on the fireplace and asked, "I've seen a house elf in that picture, do you know? Hufflepuff used to have a house elf always with him," Helena said softly, resting her chin on her knees. "But I haven't seen a portrait of that house elf. I can ask around, the other portraits at Hogwarts must know." "Thank you." Helena, her long hair spread out on the sofa like a blooming lotus, looked up and asked, "Why are you looking for it?" Ralph didn't answer. He had only mentioned the contents of those 4 paintings to Newt. Even Sherry and the others didn't know. How could he possibly tell Helena? Helena didn't press the matter further. She continued, "When do you have time?" "I'll take you to see my mother's grave." "We'll see," Ralph replied, sounding like a scumbag deliberately stringing the woman along. In his mind, Helena was a master of manipulative tactics. A green TBTCH and a scumbag are evenly matched. It's just a matter of who will come out on top in the end. "By the way," Ralph said, tapping his fingertips together, "the fat monk warned me to be careful that Bloodman Barrow finds out I met you. He'll cause me trouble." Helena bit her lip, her eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and fear, and said, "I have nothing to do with him. I'll tell him I'll marry you, even if it's a ghost marriage. I'll make him give up on that idea." Chapter 150 Hermione, wanna bet? Let's bet something exciting. Ralph and Helena talked late into the night, mostly about the past of the 4 greats. It was clear Helena still missed those times. As Ravenclaw's daughter, she was like a princess. But tragically, she stole the tiara and was killed by Barrow the Blood, dying young at only 17. Ralph listened intently, staying up late into the night, so much so that when he arrived at the Great Hall the next morning, he looked exhausted and listless. As soon as he entered, Ron rushed over, holding a smoking red letter. "Ralph, you're finally here. How did you help Neville last year?" Ralph only glanced at it before instantly waking up, quickly pulling Neville back. Ron was holding a roaring letter, but because it hadn't been opened for a long time, it was clearly on the verge of exploding. Sure enough, after they had only retreated a few meters, the roaring letter flashed a brilliant white light and exploded, leaving Ron's face covered in black marks. The scraps of paper didn't scatter on the ground. Instead, they exploded above his head like firecrackers. Ron covered his head and ran, but the scraps relentlessly pursued him. "You stole a car, and I wouldn't be surprised if they expel you. Your father will be investigated at the Ministry of Magic, and it's all your fault. If you don't behave, we'll bring you back right now, you understand?" "Ron, I've never hit you before, but if you dare disobey, I really will beat you again." Mrs. Weasley's voice echoed in the Great Hall, and all the students looked up to see who had received the howling letter. Neville looked relieved. He had also received a howling letter last year, but thankfully Ron had thrown it into the black suitcase, preventing social death. Ron, however, was less fortunate. He had witnessed Ron help Neville deal with the howling letter and wanted Ron's help too, but he was too late. Harry came over and helped the still shaken Ron up. Like a blind monk discovering a key point, he asked curiously, "Hey, Ron, if Mrs. Weasley said she never hit you, why did she say hit you again? Maybe she did hit you before, but it made Ron forget everything." Ron thought for a moment and offered a reasonable explanation. Mrs. Weasley was probably too angry and accidentally let it slip. Forgot everything? Ron suddenly realized. He remembered being very smart as a child, but it seemed he suddenly became less sharp around 6 or 7 years old. He must have been badly injured during that time. Even his memory was impaired. The more Ron thought about it, the more it made sense, and he immediately ran to find the twins to confirm. Ron and Neville headed towards the Hufflepuff table. If they didn't hurry up and eat breakfast, class would start. They couldn't be late for the first class. After all, it was their headmaster's herbalism class. Hermione, who had finished eating and reviewed her lessons for a while, walked over carrying a heavy school bag. She asked, "Why are you so late?" "We stayed up late studying last night," Ralph said, picking up a piece of buttered bread and taking a big bite. "I don't believe you." Hermione sat down in a chair and picked up a magazine, reading intently. Ralph glanced at the book in the girl's hand and asked curiously, "Why are you reading the Quibbler?" "I'm seeing if there's any interesting news." Ralph looked at her suspiciously. "But yesterday on the train, you said this magazine was garbage, completely worthless." Hermione blushed slightly and explained, Some of the articles are quite interesting. I mean, it's still, seeing the boy's gaze sweep over her, the girl hurriedly flipped through a few pages, from the article she had read several times, Scamander saves the Orient Express, to the article arguing that there are wizards on the moon. You think this article is interesting? Ralph raised an eyebrow. Is that a problem? Hermione slammed the magazine shut and snorted, mind your own business. Ralph had no choice but to continue eating his breakfast. Hermione picked up the magazine again and started reading the article, but it only went up to the point where Ralph saved a Ministry of Magic witch and claimed to be a kind veterinarian. The rest would have to wait for the next issue. Damn it. Update already. So little, who's going to read it? By the way, Ralph, I glanced at that article about you, just a quick look. Hermione cleared her throat and said, why does it keep bashing Professor Lockhart, calling him a fraud? And saying he hired wizards to impersonate Death Eaters to stop cars. That's going too far to slander a famous wizard like that. Lovegood might have exaggerated in other parts, but his assessment of Lockhart is very accurate, Ralph said calmly. He is a fraud? How could that be? He's written so many books and won so many awards. Dumbledore recruited him as a teacher. Quirrell was also recruited by Dumbledore. Ralph raised an eyebrow, gave Hermione a provocative look, and smiled. I won't argue with you. Want to bet? I bet he's a fraud. Hermione puffed out her cheeks and said, fine. I don't believe he's a fraud. Let's not bet galleons. How about something bigger? Ralph pressed on. You decide the stakes. Hermione replied decisively. Fine, you said it yourself. Don't go back on your word if you lose. Ralph smiled broadly. He was good at dealing with stubborn people and would help Hermione soften up. The girl glared at him again when he wasn't looking. Neville rubbed his forehead. Hermione was a typical forgetful girl. Sigh, she was clearly the smartest student in the class, so why did she always seem so silly in front of Ralph? He didn't understand. After finishing their meal, the group hurried towards the greenhouse, and just as they reached the entrance, they unexpectedly ran into Lockhart. Lockhart followed Professor Sprout from the willow of the brawler. Upon seeing the students, he greeted them with a broad smile. Oh, how are you? I just demonstrated to Professor Sprout how to treat a willow of the brawler. But I don't want you to think I'm better than her at herbalism. I just happened to see a few of these strange plants during my travels. Professor Sprout's face was grim. If it weren't for the students, she would have smashed Lockhart's head with a hoe. Harry was pulled away by Lockhart, seemingly to discuss something with him. Everyone to Greenhouse 3. Professor Sprout took a large key from her belt and opened the door. Last school year, they were still in Greenhouse 1, where the plants were said to be far less dangerous than in Greenhouse 3. Upon entering the greenhouse, Professor Sprout leaned closer and whispered, Rolf, I heard Dumbledore say you can heal injuries with just a touch? Will your magic work on the Whomping Willow? Probably not. This magic only works on magical creatures, Rolf said softly. But I have other magic that can accelerate plant growth, which should help the Whomping Willow recover quickly. Alright, then come with me to take a look after class. Professor Sprout brightened up again. Rolf thought for a moment, then suddenly grinned. Professor, since Professor Lockhart said he can heal the Whomping Willow, why not let him try? Professor Sprout's eyes lit up. That's right, you're right. Thanks to Magnetic Levitation Silver Bullet, Just Love Waiting in the Water, and Rose for their generous donations. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.